Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Sitting next to Carmen is John Constantino of Grass Valley. And between John and myself is Jenny Lester Moffett of Davis. On my far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and between Bob and myself is Sandra Meraz of Alpa. My name is Carl Longley of Fresno. I'll now introduce the executive officer who will introduce her staff.
Good morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. Across the room from me to my left is Andrew Altivo, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Alex Mayer, Staff Counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi-Rizzardi, Executive Assistant for the board, and to Karen's right is Ken Landau, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to my immediate left is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the board, and to my immediate right is David Koop, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. In the audience is Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer in the Reading office, Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office, and Richard Lunkarvish, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office. And there's a number of staff in the room, and we also have an ex-EO in the room, Bill Crooks.
Mr. Crooks, who is Mr. Crooks?
He was my executive officer when I was a staff here at Central Valley.
And Mr. Crooks
welcome.
was my executive officer at one
and
time
we
also.
I'm sorry, we also have State Board Member Tam Dodek in the audience too.
Tam, welcome. Tam and Felicia Marcus are going to be taking a trip down to southern part of the valley to see all the great things we have down there. We're in the process of putting that together now. I understand from Felicia that she wants to see the hot spots. I guess I need a definition, Tam, on what hot spots are. We'll put together a great tour. Thank you. With that, Jenny, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll go now to approval of the minutes. The board members have copies of the minutes. Yeah. We got 4 sets of minutes, and we'll begin with the October 30th, 2013 workshop in Colusa. This was coming forward, and there were some attendees left off, among other things, and we took it back and reworked it. But do I have a motion?
I move to.
I'll second.
Jenny's moved, Bob seconded. All in favor, state so by saying aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Motion carries.
And I'll abstain.
I wasn't there.
I wasn't there.
And Carmen and Sandra abstained. Thank you. We'll then go to the December 5-6 workshop here. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
John's moved. John's moved. Jenny seconded. That was a regular board meeting. You were all there, or
And
all here.
And even though I wasn't there for items 1 through 6, they weren't substantive, so I intend to vote on this one.
Okay. All in favor of the motion, say so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Motion carries. We'll now go to the January 9th hearing in Los Banos. And let's see here. Right, and we had, Bob wasn't there and Sandra wasn't there. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
And I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor, state so by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Abstentions? Sandra and Bob are abstaining. Motion carries. We'll now go to the January 16th meeting in Kettleman City. Sandra and Carmen were not in attendance. The rest of us were there. Do I have a motion?
I move.
Jenny's moved. Bob seconded. All in favor state so by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions?
I'll
Motion-
abstain.
Carmen abstains. Motion carries. And Sandra abstains, yeah. Something has changed, Mr. Crooks. We no longer need 5 board members. We need 4 for a quorum. Just in case you're wondering. With that, we'll move on the agenda to item number 13. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with a summary agenda and are available here at the staff table and upon request, and are posted on the board's website and are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Kiran Lanfranchi Rosardi, our administrative assistant sitting up here. Are there item 14 on the agenda? Are there any board members' discussions?
Yeah. And I submitted these in writing also to Kieran. But on December 18th, along with Chair Longley and Pamela Creedon, we met with state board members Felicia Marcus and Dita Diadamo. I have a hard time saying her name. And Tom Howard regarding some nitrate mapping. And then I had a similar meeting with Tam Dudek on January 3rd. On January 24th, I attended a CDFA nitrogen tracking and reporting forum in Modesto. That was indicated for the crop community. And on January 30th, I participated, Bob mentioned this yesterday, we participated in a marijuana working group conference call. And then January 31st, we at Dixon Ridge Farms, we hosted an on-site meeting and tour of our facility to discuss holing and processed wastewater. And that was for staff. We hosted the meeting for staff.
Anybody else with a report?
Carl, I just want to say that on the marijuana, I noted today that Mendocino County was looking a lot more at marijuana growers with illegal water diversions, and I suspect in our region that also, while it's not a regional board issue, we look at water quality. It's a huge issue in these counties, and I'm hopeful that the state board's looking at those issues.
Yes. I guess there's nothing more. I can't comment on that further, but I would agree that water rights is going to be playing a role in the marijuana issues we go down the road. And I'll be submitting mine separately in writing, but Jenny's already mentioned 2 meetings on June that I was in attendance on June 10th. June 10th. Yeah, January 10th. I was at a briefing at Westlands Water District of Governor Brown on the drought, and I spoke at that. This was, quite frankly, January is a pretty slow month for me. I was involved with the salinity issue in the valley, but from the university, not directly related to board business, but I will include that in the written activities that I submit. Anybody else? Good. We'll move then to the next item on the agenda, item 15. I don't have any attendance cards, so you have some. Thank you. I have a card from a gentleman, William Crooks, retired, for the public forum. Yes, sir. Could you come to the forum, to the podium, please? I'm sorry, sir, your time's up. You need to turn the mic on.
I'm still mindful of the order that you have against me to limit my presentations. I'm probably not going to comply. Many of you probably saw Jay Leno's retirement last night. I certainly did not. It was on too late, but he had a string of 22 years, and finally he's retired. We've got a person in our midst that's past the 22 years and on 23 years, and that person's not retired. At least I don't think he's retired so far. Before I get started, just some brief history is probably in line. The boards got started in 1950. Their first executive officer was a really tough guy, Colonel Joseph A. Gorlinski. He was followed by Charles T. Carnahan, and next by James A. Robertson. I served my apprentice at the state board, and then I got a real job here at the regional board in May of 1970. By 1982, I had become the executive officer of the board, and by that time, as far as I was able to determine, there was no history, official history, of regional board member involvement. The only document that I ever found was provided by Paul Jefferson. Mr. Jefferson was a chemical engineer and in charge of our industrial waste program, and he kept a running total of all the regional board members that had ever been appointed to the Central Valley Board. And I went through when he retired, I think that record died, and I don't think there's an ongoing official record around. But I can tell you that I was familiar with that record. At that particular time when I came on board, it seemed rather clear that most regional board members did not last more than one term. A couple, 2 terms, mostly 1 or 2 terms. Some exceptions were a fine woman chairman from Sacramento, Norma Clevenger, served 3 terms. Priscilla Hanford from Paradise served 3 terms. Clifford Wisdom, Board of Supervisor member from Stockton, served 3 terms. And before I left, Hugh Johns, to quote him, a poor dirt farmer from Hanford, he was on his 4th term. And that was, as far as I could tell, the lengthy board member attendance at that time. As I said, I became executive officer in '82. I don't know how, but they couldn't find anybody else. In 1989, I thought by that time I had had people kind of snowed that I knew a little bit about water quality and civil engineering. Unfortunately, in '89, the governor saw fit to appoint a real civil engineer to the board, and I started worrying because I thought this person was going to really find all the problems that we were producing in the staff reports. He was going to tell me that I used the wrong formula, that I forgot the Corvallis effect, and all kinds of other things that were. I was certainly wrong. I was absolutely wrong. This person that came on, and I think by now you figured it out, it was Dr. Carl Longley, a well-known civil engineer and professor from Fresno State. He was a perfect gentleman. He did not point out all my errors and all staff errors. He provided just excellent guidance, not only to the staff people, but to other board, under his chairmanships, to other board members that came in, because clearly he had experience. I mentioned Hugh Johns. In 1996, I got crosswise a little bit with the governor and his people, Pete Wilson. Dr. Longley leapt to my defense, along with Hugh Johns. Hugh Johns would have served more than 4 terms, but he voted for me, and so he was ousted. And that ended Carl's long term at that time by the fact that he voted for me. But a more enlightened governor came in the next term and reappointed Carl back on the board. And so he's back and serving 23 plus years, I believe now, Dr. Longley. Dr. Longley, this is where it gets tough. I want to personally thank you for what you've done for me, and more importantly, what you've done for the staff and other members of the board. And much more importantly than that, the citizens of the Central Valley should thank you for what you've done to protect ground and surface water. Sorry, folks, for all these years. So I thank you very much, Dr. Longley.
Thank you very much, Bill. I don't know how to reply to that. Being an executive officer, and I've certainly watched executive officers over the years, has to be one of the toughest jobs around. And because you guys are out there, guys and gals, you're out there every day having to take the flak. And I've served with some good executive officers here, and certainly you and Pamela are among the top. Folks that will tell it like it is and take the consequences. And it's not that easy to find people who will do that. And so, I'd like to return the favor. I would like to ask for a round of applause for your service. It's hard to top that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on, is there anyone else that would like to speak? We'll go to the Executive's Office report, agenda item 16.
So Dr. Longley, I don't have any staff presentations to make today, but we do have, that was very touching, thank you, Bill. I saw, to get over my crying when I saw. Unless there are any questions about the Executive Officer report, what I have today for a short couple of minutes is Clint, I'm so sorry, Clint. Our board has invested a lot of time. You'll see Andrew in a little bit. We've invested a lot of time in trying to improve or work and train and educate us on our project management and time management and leadership. And part of that was an extensive amount of time spent with our staff on project management. And with Clint moving into his role, he's now taken the lead in helping us develop what we call portfolio management, which is excellent. It's another way to try and help our limited resources to improve our efficiencies and do our job a little better. And so I wanted to have Clint come and chat just a little bit with you and present just what we're what we are going to accomplish through our portfolio management. So with that, Clint Snyder, he's our AEO in the Reading office. You will need to turn on your speaker or your microphone.
Haven't done this in a while, thanks. Morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. As Pamela said, my name is Clint Snyder. I'm Assistant Executive Officer and I manage the Reading office. This morning I'll be providing a short overview of portfolio management. It's a new concept. We'll be rolling out within the next couple of months. It'll be implemented in all programs within the Central Valley Water Board. And of course, this is in concert with Ms. Creighton's vision of improving transparency, accountability, and efficiency at all levels in the organization. So some considerations that we need to take into account anytime we're developing something like this are really that program managers are primarily responsible for implementing the Central Valley Water Board's 17 major programs. They're the point people. They do this through the efforts of a varying number of staff that may or may not reside in their home office. So immediately you start running into some challenges. Each program faces, in addition to that, some unique technical, financial, resource, stakeholder, and other external challenges. Program staff work with a multitude of offices, each with its own culture and its own organizational structure. Staff often work in multiple programs themselves. For example, the Reading Groundwater Unit, each of those staff manage 3 different programs. So the UST program, the Site Cleanup program, and the Land Disposal Top 27 program. And as a result, this requires staff to constantly prioritize and reprioritize program demands. So for any program to be successful, executive management must also share responsibility in working with staff and management to achieve those defined goals. We also need to look at and leverage existing processes that work well whenever possible. So, for instance, a lot of the units have monthly unit meetings, for instance. So how can we leverage those existing processes without sort of upsetting the apple cart? Just as importantly is that whatever structure we come up with, portfolio management, for instance, needs to be able to dovetail adequately to external processes. So there are a lot of processes at state board that we need to take into consideration, a lot of processes at other regional boards that we need to take into consideration, and of course stakeholder involvement into consideration. And lastly but not least is the cost benefit. So anytime you're thinking about a process such as portfolio management, some of those key aspects are staff are already stretched to the limit. And so by implementing a new program, is it going to make their jobs easier? Are the added benefits of communication, of decision making, of inherent efficiencies in permitting processes, et cetera, worth the added cost of implementing or the added risk of implementing a process like this? So bottom line is a lot of thought goes into these processes before we actually roll it out. So this table here is just a quick summary, and obviously I don't anticipate everyone to be able to read this real quickly here, but it summarizes on the far left-hand column the 17 programs, major programs anyway, within the Central Valley Water Board. Immediately to the right of that is the program manager responsible for implementing that program, along with their assigned executive sponsor, again, which may or may not reside in that particular office, and then finally the office where that program is managed. But again, behind this table is really the challenge involved in implementing each of these programs in a fair and consistent manner, the diversity of each program, the culture and organizational structures of each of the three offices, and the 222 staff responsible for executing our mission over 40% of the state. So a little bit of background here. Portfolio management isn't really new. We've actually been working on this concept for quite some time. Beginning in 2007, even before I joined the water boards, the executive management group, that being the executive officer and her assistant executive officers, first issued a memorandum outlining the program manager's roles and responsibilities. From 2008 to 2010, the Central Valley Water Board executive management made a significant investment in training all staff in program management and the fundamentals thereof. And as a capstone to that effort, the leadership team proposed an implementation strategy in 2011, which was adopted by the executive management group. So this work on the slide summarized here really forms the foundation of portfolio management and what we'll be talking about. So again, this slide is, the information conveyed on this slide is very difficult to summarize without bringing this into a very lengthy discussion. You have a copy of the portfolio management document with you. Maybe you can get a chance to look at that at a little later time. But there are some key factors here. One, bottom line is there actually is a process. It is based on a fiscal year cycle. So you can see the four white sort of quadrants represent quarters in the fiscal year. Some key aspects here are that development, distribution, deployment, monitoring, and finally analysis. So I was told there's a pointer on this thing. So really it starts up in this corner here. This is work plan development. So the program manager actually puts together a programmatic work plan for the fiscal year. There's a format associated with that. They do that in consultation with their executive sponsor, supervisors, and seniors in the other offices that work in their program. Following that, there's a consultation with the executive management group. In the past, that has taken about 2 days out of everyone's schedules to conduct those consultations. We may be even looking at three days this year to do that. But once we leave that consultation, the program manager will then deploy that work plan through the ranks. And so it'll first be distributed to supervisors within their program, then to seniors within their program, staff within their program, to really just lay the foundation of what the expectations for that program, what the goals and objectives are to achieve that year. And so we're looking at both quantitative goals and qualitative goals. Quantitative goals being the very simple sort of metric type goals you would think of, such as performance measures. Qualitative goals really falling more in line with overall changes in the program's direction, things they want to accomplish there that you really can't put a firm number on. Even programs such as basin planning or programs heavy in stakeholder processes. So with that regard, you may not have a firm deadline to meet, but you'll be using things like benchmarks and milestones to measure your success through the fiscal year. But the bottom line is everyone is on the same page. Once staff receive sort of the direction from the program manager, they will then in turn take, if in fact they work in multiple programs, they would take all of those work plans and they would say, based on my schedule, this is what I can get done for you. So there's a level of commitment there, and I'll show you an example of what that work plan commitment looks like. But staff have an opportunity to weigh out and balance those priorities of one program or multiple programs, if so they're responsible for. Once they've done that, then they push that to their senior, their unit senior. The unit senior, again, there may be some conversation bouncing back and forth, but the unit senior will buy off on that. And likewise, push it up to the supervising level and back to the program manager. So that's this whole sort of southern circle here, is that process, distribution and work plan development. In the end, the program manager will have essentially two work plans. They'll have one that they sent down through the ranks, and then the other one is sort of the work plan commitments coming back to them saying, hey, we can do this. Once that process has been completed, then the program manager will hold an all-staff meeting for that program, and that's really their opportunity to lay out the foundation moving forward, how they're going to assess progress, how they would like issues to be raised if there are potential problems or priorities have shifted, so that those staff can raise those concerns to get those work plans modified. So a lot of those types of processes, the EMG would be involved in that as well. But that's really the kickoff for the fiscal year. We've made the commitments, everyone's bought off on it, it's go time. So once that happens, then there are quarterly briefings sort of moving around the fiscal year cycle. Those quarterly briefings, again, have a structure in place. There's a number of questions that we'll be asking, that the program manager will be asking and getting feedback from staff. But in the end, it's really analysis. How well are we doing? Are we on track to meet our goals? Is there anything we can do to make improvements to the program, whether that's through communication or what have you? Ideally, during the first quarter, you're 3 months into it, you're not going to have a lot of information, but still you're going to have enough to know if things are roughly on the right track. At the halfway mark, again, a lot of the same questions, a little bit more in depth because we've got a little bit more to go off of. Here at this point, we're really looking at, have we met being 50% through the fiscal year? Have we met 50% of the goals? Are we halfway there? Are we 40%? Are we 60%? What's sitting out there? And then are there any changes we need to make moving forward? Has new direction come from the board that we need to shift priorities from the executive officer, or maybe even state board or some external forces at work there that we need to just shift priorities? Again, the third quarterly, or the last quarterly report is much the same format. Again, a little bit more in depth. And then from this point, we move over into this quadrant here, and this is really a final assessment piece that'll be conducted right after the end of the fiscal year. It's really just kind of a timeout. Let's assess the program, how well we did this year, get some feedback from staff, management, executive management, et cetera. Are there improvements that we can make to the program moving forward to the next fiscal year? And of course, this is a cycle, and so those changes or those improvements that we've identified would then be wrapped into next fiscal year's work plans, and continually having a method to focus those changes, those comments and questions, kind of looking at it is there a better way to do this each and every year as we move through the cycle? And bringing that focus back to the program and the program manager really gives us an opportunity to streamline communication, from the executive officer. And then we now have a point person. There's a lot that goes into this as far as responsibility and authorities and things like that. But in the end, we should be able to push it straight from the program manager down through the staff. Staff will have a much better idea as to what the expectations are and kind of how they fit into that network, and more importantly, where's the program headed and how can they contribute. And so with that, this is just a quick copy, just actually a snippet of the work plan. It's an Excel sheet. It's based on a work breakdown structure format, again, trying to build off of the project management training that everyone has received. The other concept is that this is on everyone's desktop. It doesn't cost any money. No necessary training whatsoever to use this. And really, program managers will be working with the seniors in their programs to develop templates for the work breakdown structure. So as you might imagine, we talk a lot about the MPDS permits in this room. If you were to ask one staff to identify the tasks associated with completing an MPDS permit, one staff might provide you 10, another might provide you 50 or 60. And so the idea here is that we need to be consistent. And so having the program manager and those seniors communicate and effectively establish those templates, at that point in time, everyone is on the same page, trying to get it down to a task list that looks more like, on an MPDS permit scale, maybe 5 or 6 tasks. So the idea is that these are copied and pasted to the seniors push to the supervisors, and so on. And so in the end, we have a very methodical format without any extra cost and training. The idea here with the whole portfolio management system, as I said earlier, is to start simple. It's a structure. And so by starting simple, we develop the habit and have a structure that we can continue to build on in the future. So
and you know
that
what,
is,
I was just going to say that's really good, because I know it's really frustrating when, members of the public need something and they don't get all the information up front. Like, what are they going to have to provide? Or if they're getting different information from different staff. So that's really good. So I appreciate that.
This is a program throughout the water boards, is that correct?
no, this is a Central Valley Water Board.
Nothing happening at the state board level or along this line? Is this something you rolled out, Pamela?
Yes.
Well, yes, it's part of our process. I mean, really, in reality, we have so much to do and such limited resources, and it's like we have our staff pulled in different directions, and this is a process to help build our efficiencies. Some of our more successful programs is, instead of looking at the mountain of work to do, we start putting it more into modules and definable tasks, and things just start happening. And this is really about accountability, so we can account to the board and to the public what we've done and accomplished. It's also a way of helping us to better make sure, as an executive staff, that we make sure our staff have the resources and support they need, and also to help us communicate if we're pulling them in different directions, then we know something has to give, and we can better talk about what has to give. So it's really a way to help us manage all that we have to do to meet the board's desires, state board desires, and all the different things.
And
it's also-
with changing priorities, make sure things don't fall off the table.
Exactly, and it's just also a way to empower staff and managers as
Right.
well.
Well, congratulate you guys on what you're doing. It's
Clint took the lead on this, so I've been trying to, you'll see more of Clint around, because I'm trying to spread the work around to all of my excellent assistant executive officers, so that they can help put this together for us. So
Just real quickly, we're actually in the process of rolling this out right now. We'll be meeting with the different offices. Probably had a chance to read the slide now, but a lot of internal meetings. The program managers, as I said, there's 17 of them. They are the point people for this effort. Will be, Joe, when is the meeting? Next week? I believe they will be meeting for 4 or 5 hours to get this thing off the ground. So
well,
I'm looking forward to their input as well.
when you've got 3 offices, when you've got the geography we have in the Central Valley, this is particularly useful. But I think it would be useful if you only had one office too.
Oh, I fully agree, but we've really come a long way
Yeah.
in making us one regional board, and this is
Right.
just helping us do that even more.
Bob?
I think John first.
You can go first.
Oh, good, John, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had some questions, Clint, or comments. I look at this and think, how's this interface with the budget, and where in these cycles does that work? And I assume that's partly an ongoing basis, but I think I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, there are definitely some challenges. You know, timelines are a big consideration, and that's one of the factors that we try to take into account. You know, this is really a structure. It provides enough rigidity so that everyone is on the same page all the way through the process, but it also provides enough flexibility so that we can accommodate things like that. We're not really changing any budgets matters per se with this process. This is just really an operations type of a system. So, for instance, one of the timelines that we continually wait on is there's a process early in the spring where we finalize performance measures, and a lot of that direction comes from state board. And so until we have those numbers, it's really difficult to sort of proceed through this process. But the process was designed to accommodate those external factors, as I said. But from a budgetary standpoint, there shouldn't be any impact now other than sort of promoting efficiencies and being able to gain some ground.
And I like that you did comment on external changes or even internal changes and new demands, and you have at least these quarterly meetings always set up when you can interface with those adaptive needs.
Again, that's leveraging on some existing processes. Pamela started that. I'm not sure how long ago. Actually, I've just been in this position a year, but she does meet, and the applicable AEOs do meet with the program managers quarterly now. So again, that is just one more of those things we tried to leverage without providing as least amount of disruption as possible in implementing this.
And you both commented on those demands sometimes, what's the priority and what isn't going to get done, because those should be conscious decisions and not de facto decisions. The last comment is just how the board interfaces in this process, and part of it's just I've always appreciated the future board activities that you put into your executive officer report, and that I assume it comes out of this process to some extent also. So
It will. We also have, as part of the EO report, the performance measures now, so we'll be reporting through that as well on how we're accomplishing with our goals that are set for the board. And I also eventually will discuss with the board about a strategic planning effort again. We started that a few years ago, and then when all the budget crisis and the furlough started, we stopped. So it'd be nice to reinitiate that effort again with the board to make sure we're in alignment with where you want us to go.
John?
So, Clint, thank you for the presentation. I have a couple comments, but let me start with a couple of questions. The one thing that struck me is you mentioned, and I totally get that each office would have its own culture, but I think your statement was that each office has its own structure. Could you just tell me why each office is sort of organized structurally different?
Primarily due to size. So, for instance, the Reading office, 35 staff. We're trying to cover all of the programs that, say, an office like Sacramento has with the number of staff they have down here. There's obviously some pieces we don't really touch on, such as basin planning. But the reality is, a lot of those programs still exist there. So by structure, I mean that, in my office, it's very common for staff to work in multiple programs. Ben Letton is kind of heads up our non-point source irrigated ag, dairies, a lot of touches on stormwater. I mean, just has his hands in a lot of different projects. Whereas, in Sacramento with a larger staff base, you may be working in maybe one or two. So, just logistics. The responsibilities, the consistency, things like that are all there. It's just you're working with fewer people to accomplish roughly the same goals.
And also, your office has primary responsibility for timber and mines, just given the geography of the region. That's where it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, each office is weighted differently. Actually have a slide here. Oh, man. There's a slide.
John, you asked the
There you
question.
go. Yeah, so this just kind of gives you a quick overview of the programs and kind of where they reside in the three different offices. So, Reading being weighted in some, Rancho being heavily weighted in most, and then Fresno also with the dairies, WDRs, irrigated lands type programs. So
The dairies are down south for the most part, yeah, so.
And then, how does succession planning fit into this, or does it?
these are things that Andrew has been working on, Andrew Altavat. And as I said before, really the goal here at this point in time is to get this structure in place. I think we've had a lot of discussions about things that we can sort of build upon with this system, and those were one of the considerations. Is actually Gene Crumley's been helping Andrew a little bit with that as well. So there'll be a lot of discussions in the future, and hopefully we can come back to you and kind of give you a little bit more input as to how things go as we move through the first year. The first year is going to kind of be a bit of a trial and error. We're not expecting perfection. It's just, there's going to be some things that we have to work through, and that's part of the meeting with the program managers is trying to discuss some of these. If you look at it as sort of these are the bones of the program, and the program managers kind of adding the meat to that. That's where we're at.
And so, will there be some follow-up to the board maybe at the end of the year to let us know how it goes?
We can certainly do that.
Okay. And then I just wanted to sort of put out the general appreciation for thinking about this issue for Pamela and the managers and the deputy EOs, because it's working for the state. It's not easy. There's a lot of rules and requirements and what you can do and what you can't do, and the workload just keeps piling up and the resources don't always match. So taking this very organized and professional approach to getting the job done and assigning accountability, and it's really important. And I'm glad to see it and being done. And I think that it's state workers don't get as much appreciation as they deserve, because it's between development plans and all the administrative work, it's sometimes hard to do the actual job. So I do appreciate that. Thank you.
I think both Bob and John brought up extremely good points. I have been thinking that this board needs to do, we used to call it strategic planning, whatever we're going to call it in the future, we need to begin that. We've been meeting, as you can see from the minutes we approved, the board's been meeting an awful lot because of the irrigated lands program, traveling around the state, the region. Once we get past irrigated lands, I'd like to, and we can take a breath, I'd like to consider going back to discussing with the board how we might get back into the planning effort, whether we want to call it strategic planning or something else. And I think this would be a top item there. And I think, John, that was a real good point you made about the resources not matching. And what you're doing, I can see down the road can begin to point out where we do need resources, but in a documented manner that's very supportable. Yes, Jenny?
Yeah, so as a spreadsheet person, I think this is just fantastic, and I could go on for hours and hours and ask questions about spreadsheets. But my question, so I do appreciate this presentation, and I think what you
Okay,
guys,
we need to be ready to shut off our microphone if that starts happening.
yeah, I think what you have put into place is really neat, really interesting, and it's great to see that the thought that goes into developing a work plan for staff. I have a question about the flow chart, because I also like charts. But the flow chart, we start with number 1, but there is overlap in the years, and I'm just wondering how, when you're in stage 5 with evaluations, how that evaluation would actually feed back when you're in stage 1, because it actually is further in the year than stage 1 where you might be doing your program development.
Right. The idea here is just fundamentally, and like I said, it's explained a little bit more in your packet, but just visually, the final assessments happen at the end of the fiscal year, and it's a bit unfortunate that, again, as we mentioned before, the timelines don't always line up perfectly. Ideally, we'd be working off of a calendar year, and we'd have 1 month to sort of develop these plans and then roll them out. It just doesn't work quite that way, at least not yet. There are some things that we can work on in the future to make that dovetail a little bit better. But the take-home message is that we're actually taking time out as a program and assessing how well the program is doing. Is there anything we can do to do it better, more efficient, to increase lines of communication, to get decisions made quicker, reviews of documents quicker, just a lot of those types of things that are going to need to be addressed. But through that evaluation, we'll be able to incorporate those. It may not be, perfectly in that work plan as it's it's being developed, but we will be able to incorporate those ideas as the fiscal year moves on.
Okay,
Over
so
time,
there-
we'll be able to better align this as we move forward.
It's also why we have the quarterly briefings and updates. It gives the managers an opportunity to talk to us about why some of their projections may have been wrong initially, or right, or if they're going to overshoot their projection and do better. And because that we're setting our work plan for the next year about a quarter early. So that's why it's important to have those discussions to have an update on where we are in meeting our objectives. And if it has to change, if for whatever reason we decide that it's important we meet that objective, then we have, as an executive group and the leadership group, to make sure that we realign resources to make sure it happens.
That's great, yeah. And I really do, there absolutely does need to be overlap, and, because you don't want work to stop while you're doing planning. But I'm glad to hear that there is quarterly feedback that can help inform next year's planning. Thank you.
Any further comments or questions?
I just want to say that I know, Clint, I know you weren't done with your presentation yet. I just wanted to sneak that comment in before you moved off the spreadsheet. So I'm sorry if I cut your thunder out at the last slide.
No,
so I'm
not at
sorry.
all.
Thank you. Thank you for a very informative for briefing. Anything else on the executive officer's report?
No, that's it, Dr. Long. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Bob.
I missed this when I went through it earlier, but I saw Victor Izzo is retiring, or retired.
He's gone.
You gave him permission, or?
They don't seem to come ask me. I don't
Yeah,
understand.
Victor did a lot of work on mine remediation work, and
Yes.
I appreciate that. So he will be
Yes.
missed, and I hope you're finding a replacement for that.
Yes.
Those are hard people to replace.
Just need to make sure we have the PYs to do it, that's all.
Yes, we're in the process of finding a replacement.
Very good. That takes us to agenda item number 17. Actually, we're going to go back to agenda item 9, which is City of Lincoln moved to the uncontested calendar. And after we get through with the uncontested calendar, I have to go off agenda for a minute, and then we'll take a break. But Ken, do you want to start with the City of Lincoln? Are there any late revisions?
There is a late revision on these. I'm assuming no one is here to talk about City of Lincoln.
Is there anybody here to talk about the City of Lincoln?
There is one late revision, and that is the late revision we actually talked about yesterday in Clovis, which is to remove the reference to the narrative toxicity objective supporting the disinfection requirements. And with that late
That's
revision,
it. Okay, and
Recommended
council, can we lump this in with the other uncontested items?
What I'm, Patrick brought up a good point. I'm trying to figure out whether, in fact, we've decided to run through the procedures, open up the hearing, take any comment. We can do something a little formal in that regard. That would be helpful for
it actually
creating a clear record.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, this is the time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested
Thank you.
items. We've moved agenda 9 to this item. We're also considering items 23, 25, 26, and 27. We'll be considering item 24 separately. It is a cease and desist order, but we'll be considering MPDS's permits, waste discharge requirements, rescission of enforcement orders, and, of course, the WDR and MPDS permits, and change of name and/or ownership. Does anyone present wish to discuss any of these items? Are there any late revisions? And we'll go back to 9, and you
Yes.
pointed out the City of Lincoln.
Yes, for the City of Lincoln, and we have exactly the same late revision for item 23A, Calaveras County Water District.
Okay.
Item 23D, Department of Corrections, Dual Vocational Institution, and 23E, City of Placerville, Hangtown Creek. Basically, all the sewage treatment plants. have the exact same.
The
Late
reference
revision.
to the narrative requirement.
Correct.
Requirement for toxicity.
Correct.
Very good. Okay. Do I have a motion? I'll close the hearing and ask for a motion.
I'll move.
You move to approve with late revisions?
I'll move to approve with late revisions.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Carmen moves, Jenny seconds. This is a voice vote. All in favor state so by saying aye. Opposed say no. Abstentions, motion carries. We'll then go to item 24, cease and desist order rescission.
And just for the record, I'm going to recuse myself of this, so I'm going to briefly step off the dais.
Okay, are there any late revisions, Ken?
There's no late revision, but there was an error in the title on this. We are actually rescinding Order R5-2005-0003. The 0 and the 3 were left off the agenda. So
And-
it's nice to let you know which order you're actually rescinding.
Oh, okay, good. Do I have a motion?
I'll move.
John moves, do I have a second? Bob seconds. This is a roll call vote.
Oh, she's gone, okay. Mr. Snyder? Aye. Ms. Moffett?
Aye.
Ms. Miraz?
Aye.
Mr. Costantino? Aye. Dr. Longley?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So the motion carries, and that finishes the uncontested calendar. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 18. It will take a while for this. We will recess shortly before this item, but there's two individuals that have to leave since this is simply an information item, and we're not voting. I'll go ahead and take those two individuals that would like to speak at this point in time. Ken, who are those individuals? Yes. This is item 18. Excuse me, yes, item 18.
Hi, Chair Longley, Ms. Creighton, members of the board. My name is Stephanie Fong, and I'm with the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency. And I'd like to read a letter of support today that was submitted to Ms. Creighton and staff last night via email, and then you have hard copies that I've provided today. The State and Federal Contractors Water Agency, or SWFCA, was formed in August 2009 as a joint powers authority under the California law by various water agencies that receive water transported across the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta by the State Water Project and Central Valley Project. The organization's mission is to assist its member agencies in assuring a sufficient and reliable high-quality water supply for their customers from the State Water Project and the Federal Central Valley Project. The core focus of activities in pursuing this mission is centered around facilitating habitat conservation measures and research related to the restoration of the Delta ecosystem, while assuring sufficient and reliable export water supplies. We are pleased to see this timely update to the 2008 Strategic Work Plan for activities in the San Francisco Bay, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta. We would like to commend your staff on completing many of the tasks outlined in the 2008 work plan and for the progress made on the 4 remaining tasks. These remaining tasks, along with the 5 new tasks noted, are representative of the breadth of water quality issues we all face in managing Delta resources. We look forward to engaging with you and your staff further in the development and implementation of the work plan activities. All of the tasks outlined in the work plan are of interest to SWFCA member agencies and are congruent with SWFCA's science program, science objectives. There are 3 topics that I'd like to highlight because of their importance, we are currently working on them, and the potential for SWFCA to support them through our soon-to-be-released request for proposals. The first is the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, or the RMP. SWFCA recognizes great value in a coordinated monitoring program that better serves the science needs of the Delta. We have actively participated in the development of the RMP through its steering committee, technical advisor committee, and have provided early funding to spur its progress. We understand that stakeholder efforts take time, but we have growing concerns that it's been over 5 years since the regional board announced the development of the RMP, and there is still no agreement over the details. SWFCA has identified $100,000 over the last 3 years for collaboration. Those funds could have provided $300,000 of new monitoring information consistent with the regional board and stakeholder priorities, but has been redirected due to the lack of a monitoring plan. In spite of this growing concern, we'll continue to work on these efforts and support them and provide technical assistance, data analyses, and visualizations.
Stephanie, you're reading word for word what we have in front of us. So
Right.
maybe if you could summarize it and
Sure.
just give us the high points. And it's a detailed letter, and I'll be asking the executive officer for digital copy of it, and the other board members may want that also. But it's what you're saying is very important. It's
Okay,
thick.
so also
It's thick,
provided
so
with a
you
letter.
can hit the high points.
Sure. Also provided with a letter is a technical memo on nutrients and nutrient concerns. And we believe that nutrients are another topic worth highlighting, because we don't think that it's whether or not we need to develop nutrient objectives, but how we're going to do it. Because a lot of the recent research that you'll see in the technical memo shows that it's not just which nutrients you're concerned about, but also the ratio and composition of them. And there has been a lot of recent information showing that nutrients are causing quite a bit of effects up through the food web. And then the third thing that I wanted to highlight on was also the renewed interest in pesticides. The staff is currently working on diaron and pyrethroid TMDL, 2 basin plan amendments that we fully support, and we hope that they continue to work aggressively to keep their time schedule. And also, a lot of our work with USGS has shown a new change in which pesticides are being used. And so a lot of fungicides and herbicides are being used in very high quantities, and they're being detected in surface waters. And we have very little species sensitivity information on them. So we really support staff's ability and interest in looking into these issues some more.
And number one was,
Number 1 was the RMP.
okay,
So just a quick conclusion, if I may.
sure.
I definitely wanted to commend staff again on what they've been able to accomplish and what they've lined out for the upcoming years, and that we would like to offer our assistance through my time. I actually lead the IEP contaminants work team, and we have various subcommittees that could offer help as technical advisory committee members, or just as folks to help develop or review study plans and things like that. And we also, as I said at the beginning, have funding that could possibly use to help with some of these topics and tasks. Thank you.
Questions from members of the board? You highlighted some very important activities. We appreciate that.
Thanks.
And thank you for the information you provided.
And thank you for moving me up forward. Thanks.
Okay, and Linda Smith?
Hi, good morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. I'm Linda Smith with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and our agency is also a member agency of the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency that Stephanie works with. And I appreciate you, I just wanted to make a brief comment on item number 18. I appreciate you taking me out of order due to a prior commitment that I have. So I was able to review the documents online that were prepared by staff for the Delta Strategic Work Plan, and I was very pleased, or we were very pleased to see that the new item of developing a nutrient study work plan has been added. We're very supportive of that. As the staff indicates in the report, both the Delta Stewardship Council, Delta Plan, that plan has identified addressing nutrients in both the Central Valley and the San Francisco Bay regional boards as a recommendation. And as you're probably aware, the San Francisco Regional Board has a nutrient management strategy program that they started a couple of years ago, and that's underway. And the nutrients issues in the Delta are a priority for my agency, and we're participating in the San Francisco Bay effort. We look forward to working with your staff on as they develop a nutrient study plan, if that is, stays in their strategic work plan. We feel it's very important. There's a number of studies, scientific studies that are underway in both the Delta and the San Francisco Bay region that are going to be providing very valuable information to inform these policy efforts as they move forward. So I just wanted to express my support for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from members of the board? We thank you for the support. It's a very worthwhile, very important effort. We're going to take about a 7 or 8 minute break, and we'll be back in session here, let's see, by 10 after. For agenda item 18, this time staff will present an update on the Delta Strategic Plan. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions. Staff is proposing specific Delta activities and priorities and is seeking board member comments on the strategic plan. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We've already heard 2 interested parties. We'll now begin with staff presentation.
Good morning. My name is Chris Foe. I'm a staff scientist in the Sacramento office. This is an information item about the proposed 2014 Delta Strategic Plan. I'd like to start this morning by describing the status of projects undertaken in the 2008 plan, with an emphasis on work assigned to the Central Valley Water Board. I realized in preparing this presentation that while we've updated you on various elements of the 2008 plan, we've never taken the time to brief you on the status of all the projects together. And I'd like to take this opportunity and do that this morning. Next, I will describe high priority projects we propose to accomplish over the next 5 years in the 2014 work plan. My main purpose in making this presentation is to seek direction from the board. Are the new projects our highest priority in the Delta? Are the deliverables and schedule appropriate? Finally, I'd like to shift gears and briefly update the board on 2 significant and unavoidable water quality impacts that have been disclosed in the recently released Bay Delta Conservation Plans, EIR. Okay. In 2007, the State Water Board, Central Valley, and San Francisco Bay Regional Boards formed the Delta team and wrote the 2008 Delta Strategic Plan. All 3 boards jointly adopted the plan. The purpose of the 5-year plan was to coordinate and prioritize state and regional board actions, establish key deliverables and time schedules, and identify existing and needed resources. For Region 5, all projects involved investigation and management of contaminants. We undertook 7 projects, a suite of TMDLs that are up now, and I'll talk more about each of these later. Development and implementation of a once-through cooling water policy, development and implementation of a drinking water policy, characterize Delta Island discharges, determine the effect of ammonia on Delta smelt survival on an algal primary production rates, conduct a selenium fish screening study, and finally develop and implement a comprehensive contaminant monitoring program. Some of these projects were a continuation of earlier work, while others were new efforts. The 5-year plan ended in December of 2013, and so now I'd like to briefly update you on the status of each individual element. Oops, kind of hit this thing twice. Let me see if I can go back one. Develop and implement the San Joaquin River Salt and Boron TMDL. The San Joaquin Valley has historically been recognized as a leading agricultural production area for the nation. However, it has inadequate drainage, and this has led to salt accumulation. The Central Valley Water Board adopted a salt and boron TMDL in 2004. The goal was to achieve compliance with the existing salt objective at Vernalis. The basin plan establishes salt loads allocations for individual subbasins and encourages development of implementation strategies that take into account real-time monitoring. Also, as part of the TMDL, a management agreement was negotiated with the USBR. Water quality objectives at Vernalis have been continuously met since the agreement was signed. The USBR agreement is now being reviewed to try and incorporate more real-time management while continuing to meet the Vernalis objective. An update on the agreement has been scheduled for the upcoming March board meeting. Conclusion here, I think we are making good progress on implementing the salt and boron TMDL, but we're not done. You have to realize this is a historic problem. Work will have to continue under CV salts. Next, adopt and implement upstream San Joaquin River salinity objectives. The State Water Board directed the Central Valley Water Board in Water Rights Decision 1641 to adopt and implement salt and boron objectives for the San Joaquin River above Vernalis now. The Lower San Joaquin River Committee, a subgroup of CV salts, is working on developing a basin plan amendment. The work plan has been approved. Work seems to be progressing satisfactorily, and an adoption hearing has been scheduled for December of 2015. One implementation option being considered is development of more real-time management. Conclusion here? Again, I think good progress is being made, but we're not done. Work will have to continue under CV salts.
With the adoption of that basin plan amendment in December 2015, where will we be on both of these items, the San Joaquin River Salt and Boron TMDL and the Upper San Joaquin River Salinity Objectives? Will we be in implementation of a final program, or where will we be?
Well, this is actually, I'm sort of the messenger today. And what you're going to see is a large amount of work, and I'm sort of reporting. But I'm lucky that we actually have Jeannie Chilcott, I think, in the back, and she can probably tell you more about the details. I don't want to give you false information.
I'll talk to Jeannie, or we'll talk to Jeannie. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Adopt and implement Stockton Urban Waterways Pathogen TMDL. Elevated coliform counts were measured in Stockton urban waterways by Delta Keeper and regional board staff. The high bacterial counts are considered a human health hazard for those engaging in contact recreation. That would be stuff like water skiing. To correct this, the Stockton Urban Waterways Pathogen TMDL was adopted by this board and approved by the US EPA in 2008. TMDL requirements are being implemented through the City of Stockton and San Joaquin County's NPDES stormwater permits. Now, monitoring needs to continue to ensure that coliform counts decline, but I think the work mandated by the strategic plan is done. Implement the Stockton Ship Channel Dissolved Oxygen TMDL. The San Joaquin River periodically experiences low dissolved oxygen in the first 10 miles downstream of the city of Stockton. These excursions violate the water quality objectives in the basin plan. The Central Valley Water Board adopted a TMDL in 2005. The control program contained waste allocations for the city of Stockton's regional wastewater control facility, and also encourage stakeholders to construct and fund an experimental aeration device in the channel. Significant progress has been made in meeting the requirements in the 2005 control program.
And what is the fate of that experimental DO device?
It's operational at the moment, and the discharger community continues to fund the thing. In fact, you will hear later on that BDCP says that they will contribute to the funding. So while, as you will hear later on, I don't think we're completely done here, I think we're making good progress. The So significant progress has been made on those requirements. The city of Stockton has upgraded their plan to include nitrification of ammonia, and the experimental aeration device was constructed in the West End complex. As a result, the magnitude and frequency of low dissolved oxygen violations has just markedly declined. Okay, there's just no doubt about this. However, we still have some excursions.
Now, maybe I'm getting in too deep here. The contribution of upstream organic matter to what degree has progress been made on defining that and pointing to possible solutions?
I think we have a much better idea on where it's coming from, and that helps us in a number of ways. It's going to help us run the aeration device, but clearly future work is going to have to go on in basically reducing those upstream loads. So staff proposes to continue this project in the 2014 strategic work plan. Adopt and implement a delta diazinon and chlorpyrifos TMDL. Diazinon and chlorpyrifos used to be the most common pesticides detected in the Central Valley and Delta. For example, 25% of the water samples collected on the San Joaquin River at Vernalis in 1990 tested toxic in invertebrate bioassays, 25% of them, with diazinon and chlorpyrifos being the most likely agents. In another study, diazinon chlorpyrifos was detected in over 75% of the samples analyzed for pesticides at Vernalis. A diazinon chlorpyrifos TMDL control program was adopted by this board and approved by the US EPA in 2008. The plan is being implemented through the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. I'm happy to report that the frequency of diazinon chlorpyrifos detections has markedly declined in the San Joaquin River at Vernalis and in the Delta. In fact, I am aware of no violations of the diazinon objective in the Delta this past year. Now, obviously, the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program must continue to monitor for these organophosphate pesticides, but the work mandated by the strategic plan is done. And I think this is a real water quality success story.
What contribution has the urban areas made to this issue?
The US EPA banned the use of diazinon and chlorpyrifos in urban settings, and so their contribution has really declined significantly. But I imagine you'll still see some detections of diazinon and chlorpyrifos in POTW effluent, and the reason for that was in about half of all the chemical applied on an orchard in the spring actually volatilizes, and that comes down in rainwater, and some of that gets picked up by the sewage treatment plants. So it's not completely done, but we have really markedly decreased the concentration and magnitude of these chemicals. Adopt and implemented a delta methylmercury TMDL control program. Several fish species in the Delta have elevated mercury levels in their tissues that pose a health risk for human and wildlife consumers. The Central Valley Water Board adopted a Phase 1 mercury control program in 2010 that's since been approved by the US EPA. The purpose of the plan was to reduce mercury concentrations in fish so that humans can safely eat one meal a week of a mixture of species. Phase 1 emphasizes studies to develop and evaluate management practices to control methylmercury. It also includes provisions for implementing pollution minimization programs and interim mass limits for inorganic mercury point sources, and the development and implementation of a mercury exposure reduction program to protect humans while best management practices are being developed and implemented. The Central Valley Water Board received a progress report on the Phase 1 mercury control program last December. Staff believes that this is a continuing high priority project and recommends that it be included in the 2014 Delta Strategic Plan. Adopt Old and Middle River dissolved oxygen TMDL. The low oxygen levels periodically develop during summer in Old and rivers that would be in the southern and central delta when the rock barriers are installed to divert water for agriculture. The low oxygen levels can adversely impact aquatic organisms and are a violation of the dissolved oxygen objective in the basin plan. Little progress has been made on this project because of a lack of staff resources. We propose to continue this project in the upcoming 2014 strategic plan.
What impact? Well, first of all, obviously drought years impact that greatly, I would think. Am I wrong, or?
We really haven't evaluated the data, but my hunch is, Dr. Longley, that you're absolutely right. Long residence times with high nutrient levels result in large algal growth and low dissolved oxygen concentrations at night.
Has any modeling been done to look at the impact of the tunnels on that DO issue?
No. But that's a...
Well, that's going to change flow patterns significantly.
And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but that's a very astute comment. Yes, sir. Okay. Next. Develop and implement a drinking water policy for the Central Valley and Delta. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta provides drinking water to more than 25 million people, or about 60% of the population in California. In July of 2013, the Central Valley Board adopted a drinking water policy. This includes a narrative objective for Cryptosporidium and Giardia, an implementation plan, and monitoring and surveillance sections. Staff believes that while monitoring and surveillance must continue, adoption of the policy satisfies our mandate in the 2008 strategic plan. We don't plan to continue working on this item. Develop and implement a once-through cooling water policy. Morant Delta operated 2 plants in the Delta, one at Antioch and the other at Pittsburgh. Both took in large amounts of surface water for cooling. The Antioch plant is in our region, while the Pittsburgh plant is in the San Francisco Bay region. So they just sit right on the border between the two regions. The purpose of the once-through cooling water project was to protect pelagic organisms from the adverse effects of being entrained in power plant cooling water. In 2010, the State Board adopted a statewide cooling water policy, and the Central Valley and San Francisco Bay regional boards began preparing revised MPDS permits. However, this past December, Morant Delta permanently closed both plants, and this obviated any need for MPDS permits. So again, I think we're done. Characterize Delta Island discharges. About 700,000 acres are farmed in the Delta, on Delta Islands. And the USGS estimates that about 400,000 acre-feet of water are discharged annually from this agricultural land. This represents a large, uncharacterized input to the Delta that has the potential to impact water quality. The island drainage consists of precipitation, seepage, and irrigation runoff. Funds were acquired and a contract let to measure both water quality and flow from representative Delta Islands. Unfortunately, the contract was terminated in 2010 because of a lack of contractor performance. However, much of the information sought in this contract is now being collected by other means. The Delta Water Master has begun to require Delta landowners to measure the amount of water being diverted and discharged back from their islands. Also, the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program is measuring water quality from representative islands. Ultimately, a second assessment is going to need to be made to determine the water quality threat posed by Delta Island discharges. However, this can't be done until we have sufficient representative water quality and water volume information. And we recommend that no further work continue on this project until we have that information, and then we'll take this project on.
How is that tied in with the ILRP? I know that the coalitions, I think, are doing some studying as well. I don't know if Joe wants to
Joe,
answer.
why don't you say?
Or if you know the answer.
Well, what what we're trying to do is do the big picture and not on individual islands, but we really want to see sort of in a representative fashion, what is the impact of discharge from all islands, all 400,000 acre feet of water that comes off a year. And to do that, we need water volume information from all the islands, and then we simultaneously need representative water quality information. Things like that will tell us, like nutrients, how much nutrients actually come off. And to do that, we really need the big picture. But Joe's here.
Yeah. Hi. Joe Karkowski, Program Manager for the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. Yeah, so we have had monitoring in the Delta associated with the Delta Coalition. And there have been some sites that monitor discharge from islands or drains. So there is some information characterizing what's going on. I think what Chris is referring to is something bigger and more comprehensive in terms of the kind of assessment they're trying to do. And in March, we're going to have the Delta order in front of you, and it carries over a lot of the similar surface water quality monitoring that is currently ongoing.
So it's possible that Delta growers might be participating in two separate programs with the regional board?
It could be, but that's we would have to discuss it with them and with the coalition itself. And it's also part of this overarching, which Chris will get to, is the regional monitoring program and how we integrate the irrigated lands into that. Considering we would take into consideration the cost of all of that and how we would implement it, we'd work closely with the coalitions to do that.
Okay, good, thank you.
The typical strategy we have had is that the basin planning section, the study section, does the studies, but we don't do the implementation, and then that gets fed back to either the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program or the MPDS program or whatever. Next, determine the effect of ammonia on delta smelt and on algal primary production. Two hypotheses in 2008 were that ambient ammonia concentrations in the delta were acutely toxic to larval delta smelt and were also reducing algal primary production in the delta. The primary source of the ammonia is from the Sacramento Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant and from agriculture. A contract was developed with the UC Davis Aquatic Toxicology Laboratory to conduct larval smelt bioassays on ambient water collected above and below the plant and in ambient water samples from above the plant spiked with increasing ammonia concentrations. A second contract was established with the Romberg-Tiburon Center to measure primary productions in ambient water samples collected along a transect from above the plant all the way down to Rio Vista. And also in ambient water samples from above the plant, again amended with ammonia. In addition, board staff collected water samples monthly for nutrient analysis, including ammonia from 20 representative sites across the delta for a year. The purpose of the nutrient monitoring was to compare ambient concentrations in the delta with toxic, non-toxic values that were coming out of the laboratory studies. Reports were written for the smelt bioassays, algal primary production, and nutrient monitoring results. The studies determined that ammonia concentrations in the Sacramento River and Delta were not acutely toxic to delta smelt. Bioassay procedures have not been developed for chronic work with smelt. However, acute chronic ratios with other species suggest that chronic toxicity with smelt is also not likely to be occurring. The algal primary production experiments demonstrated that ambient ammonia concentrations were inhibiting nitrogen uptake by algae and likely suppressing diatom primary production in the delta. The results of these studies helped inform the development of the revised MPDS permit for the Sacramento Regional Wastewater Treatment Facility, and I personally think this work is done. But you can start to see why the state and federal water contractors and MET want more nutrient work. conduct selenium screening study in the Delta. The freshwater delta is located between two potential sources of selenium. Subsurface agricultural tile drainage transported down the San Joaquin River from the Panoche Fan area and mud and salt sloughs, and oil refinery waste being tidally advected up the estuary from the Carquinez Straits in San Francisco Bay, like we get salt intrusion in the Delta, same basic concept. In spite of up and downstream selenium sources, surprisingly little selenium tissue burden information exists for fish in the Delta. Large numbers of fish have been collected and archived over the years for mercury analysis. The purpose of the selenium screening study was to use some of these archived fish to determine selenium concentrations at representative sites across the Delta for multiple years. These values were compared with safe concentrations established by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for warm water fish communities and for human consumption by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. A contract was established with the Moslandi Marine Laboratory to analyze selenium in archived fish, and staff wrote an interpretive report. The results suggest that selenium concentrations in the Delta do not pose a health risk to either the warm water pelagic fish community nor to humans consuming them. We think this project is done. The last project we undertook was to develop and implement a comprehensive contaminant monitoring program in the Delta. This is what we're now calling the Regional Monitoring Program, or RMP. The goals and objectives were similar in 2008 to what's now being envisioned. Many agencies collect water quality, flow, and ecological data in the Delta because of their own organizational mandates. However, much of the monitoring is uncoordinated, so that some of it's duplicative, while important information gaps remain unanswered. To a large extent, this is because no coordinated monitoring assessment program exists. Progress on developing a regional monitoring program has been slow, but I think it's steady. The Delta RMP has completed its organizational phase. A steering committee has been formed. Governance structures are in place. Technical committee sub-chairs have been appointed, and efforts are in progress to select the first projects for implementation. The initial RMP funding will come from a redirection of a portion of the current funds spent by discharges for receiving water monitoring. Staff believes that the RMP remains a high priority project and recommend that it be continued in the 2014 Strategic Work Plan. Now, I'd like to describe the proposed 2014 Delta Strategic Work Plan. The plan has 9 projects. 4 of these are a carryover from the 2008 plan. They are continue implementing the mercury control program for the Delta, review and perhaps modify the control program for low dissolved oxygen in the Stockton Ship Channel, evaluate control options for correcting the low dissolved oxygen levels in Middle and Old Rivers, and develop and implement a sustainable regional monitoring program for the Delta. There are 3 new projects being proposed, and these are all recommended by the Delta Stewardship Council. They are develop and implement a nutrient study plan for the Delta, adopt and implement a pyrethroid insecticide basin plan amendment for the Delta, and evaluate recycling and reuse of municipal wastewater. Finally, 2 programs are being recommended by board staff. They are adopt and implement a diuron basin plan amendment for the Delta, and 2, conduct a toxicological assessment of current use herbicides and fungicides that we're now seeing in the Delta. And we'd like to do that obviously with the focus on algal species.
Chris, Stephanie Fong said one of her 3 priorities, or their 3 priorities, was species sensitivity as part of the pesticides program. How does that work into this?
I think we're talking about exactly the same thing. I'll touch on each of these in more detail, but yes, I think we basically envision the same study plan. Like the 2008 strategic plan, the new plan has been developed for a 5-year period and identifies what we think are high priority projects, key timelines and deliverables, and resource needs. Some of the projects are ongoing and can be accomplished with existing funds. Others will require additional staff and contract money to carry out. And I'm going to identify these projects as we move along. Obviously, staff cannot guarantee that unfunded projects will be carried out unless additional external funding is made available or internal funding is redirected. This is a zero-sum game. Now, I'd like to describe each project with an emphasis on why it's needed, what the key tasks and deliverables are, and whether additional resources will be needed to carry it out. Implement the mercury control program for the Delta. We intend to continue to work and carry out the tasks and deliverables you approved in the 2010 Basin Plan Amendment. We don't think we need any money to do this. Review the low dissolved oxygen control program for the Stockton Ship Channel. The map to the right shows the impaired area. It's this circled area here. Basically, to orient you, this is the San Joaquin River traveling north. Right here, it meets the Stockton Ship Channel, and then the two continue out to San Francisco Bay. So the impaired area just starts at the southern extremity of the ship channel. As previously noted, the upgrade of the Stockton Regional Wastewater Control Facility and installation of experimental aeration devices has significantly decreased the magnitude and frequency of low dissolved oxygen episodes in the channel. Nonetheless, we still have some periodic exceedances. Staff will review all new information since adoption of the 2005 plan, consult with stakeholders, and present a set of recommendations for further action to the board this fall. Staff will, if directed by you, develop a final Basin Plan amendment for an adoption hearing in the spring of 2018. We don't think we need any resources to carry this out. Any new resources? Yeah, we're going to continue working. We hope you pay us.
Oh, we thought you were just going to do pro bono.
The next one is evaluate control options for correcting the low dissolved oxygen in Middle and Old Rivers. The impaired area, again, is in the map to the right. It's circled. To orient you, this is the San Joaquin River heading north. This is a really active mouse, and it hits the Deepwater Ship Channel right here. Old River comes off of the San Joaquin at right about here and heads across to the pumps. Middle River comes off of Old River and moves up here to enter the San Joaquin again in the Central Delta. Okay. As previously noted, this was a project that was included in the 2008 work plan but was not accomplished because of a lack of staff. In the summer of 2013, staff began to assemble all available water quality data for Middle and Old Rivers. We propose to continue this and write a white paper with stakeholders' help that describes the nature and extent of the problem, the causes, and outlines a series of potential control options. The white paper will be presented to the board in the summer of 2016. At that time, we will solicit your direction on how to proceed. If the board decides that a Basin Plan amendment is required, then staff will develop such an amendment by the summer of 2018. We think we're going to need about a half a person here, or PY, in 2015 to prepare the white paper. Funding needs thereafter are obviously dependent on what you direct us to do. Develop and implement a Delta Regional Monitoring Program. Staff will continue to work with stakeholders on implementing the Regional Monitoring Program. This summer, staff will present the Water Board a resolution to revise discharge permits and allow participation in the RMP in lieu of each permit holder conducting his own monitoring. In the winter of 2014, the steering committee will finalize the monitoring and assessment framework, and the spring of 2015 begin monitoring and assessment. It's hoped that the RMP will be finalizing their first monitoring assessment report in the winter of 2018. No staff resources are required, but we're obviously going to need additional contract money for the monitoring and assessment work. And perhaps the state and federal water contractors will help contribute to that. Nutrient study plan. The top picture on the right is a back slough in the delta that's clogged with water hyacinths. The bottom picture is Agarria densa in French Camp Slough. Both are introduced species whose biomass has exploded in the delta in the last several years. In fact, this past fall, the Coast Guard halted ship traffic in the Stockton Ship Channel at night because the radar on the large ships could not distinguish between the large floating mats of water hyacinths and the edge of the channel. And the Coast Guard hired a mechanical harvester for the first time to begin clearing the channel. Water hyacinths and Agarria densa degrade water quality by restricting pleasure boat traffic, reducing oxygen levels beneath the floating plants, and acting as ambush sites for predators feeding on larval salmon and other baby fish. I don't have a picture of this, but blooms of blue-green algae, microcystis, are now common almost every fall in the central and southern delta. Microcystis can secrete a toxin called microcystin, which at high concentrations is lethal to both people and wildlife.
These are common in freshwater areas. Do they persist in salt water?
There are other cyanobacteria, blue-green species in salt water. But microcystis, to my knowledge, is a freshwater species.
Okay. Yes, I'm aware of blue-greens in salt water, but I'm talking about the blooms of the picture you have here.
Oh, water hyacinths, Agarria
Water
densa.
hyacinths,
They're a
excuse me, yeah.
freshwater problem. They're just ours.
They're not a saltwater problem, is that
No.
correct?
No.
I've encountered them in Central and South America in freshwater, but I've never seen them in salt water.
And in fact, I think the water hyacinths came to us as a present from South America. Finally, as Stephanie Fong said, elevated concentrations of nitrogen and shifts in the nitrogen-phosphorus ratio have been hypothesized to result in shifts in the delta algal community from nutritious forms like diatoms to less desirable algal species such as blue-greens and flagellates. Now, we've known for a long time that the delta had elevated nutrient levels. However, it was assumed that they did not impair beneficial uses. Scientists at the Delta Stewardship Council and elsewhere have begun to question this and have asked regional board staff to develop a nutrient study plan and investigate whether elevated concentrations of nutrients are responsible for the water hyacinths, Agarria densa, and blue-green algal blooms that we seem to be experiencing each fall in the delta. If nutrients are at least partially responsible, then they'd like us to develop nutrient objectives for the delta. Okay? We propose this spring to form a Nutrient Technical Advisory Committee, or TAC, and request that the Discharge Community form a Stakeholder Advisory Group, or SAG, to help develop nutrient study plans. The key research question, again, is whether ambient nutrient levels cause or contribute to these water quality impacts. Staff will present the nutrient study plan to the Central Valley Water Board and the Delta Stewardship Council next winter, and will begin to solicit external funds to carry out the studies. It's anticipated that much of the initial work can be accomplished in about 3 years. If so, then staff will write a white paper in consultation with the TAG and SAG, summarizing this new information and evaluate whether nutrients are contributing to these water quality problems. Staff will present the conclusions of the white paper to the board probably in the spring of 2018 and seek direction on how you want to proceed, including whether a basin plan amendment is needed to establish water quality objectives. Resources. To carry this out, we estimate that we're going to need about a PY or person year for about 3 years, 2015 to 2017. We will also need contract money to implement the studies, but we don't know how much that will be until we have the study plans developed. Next, Pyrethroid Basin Plan Amendment.
Chris, can?
Yes,
so,
sir.
Pamela, so and maybe we'll get to this at the end, but so if you go back one slide, or we can just talk about it. The idea that you're going to need a half a PY, that is not something the board, are you looking for board direction on that, or are you just telling us and then you will go through the standard channels to obtain that? What I'm trying to figure out the interaction.
Well, we're looking for the board to agree with the priority of the projects that they've recommended. And if you're in agreement with that, then we have to begin working on how we divert PYs to work on this. I guess we could try to ask for additional PYs, but I don't think that would work. So it's within the existing basin planning staff that we work on that. And then in terms of contract monies, annually we work with the state board. Either we try to have it funded through outside sources, or we go seek funding from the state board to pay for the contract services needed.
And since we're talking about this subject, at the end of this, I would be asking you normally, these projects that are being presented to us are your recommendation as you move forward. Is that correct?
This is what we're recommending for the priorities from
Yes.
staff to the
Yes.
board. Yes. It's also, this is also a group effort at the state board together with state board staff and the San Francisco Bay Regional Board. So at this point, and then the state board members will also be aware of it. So there's, if they all are in agreement with the priorities, then there would be an emphasis by, I'm assuming by Tom Howard, to put some resources towards this effort.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Continue.
Pyrethroid Insecticide Basin Plan Amendment. Another project that the Delta Stewardship Council requested is that we develop and implement a pyrethroid insecticide basin plan amendment. 25 pyrethroid insecticides are registered for urban and agricultural use in California. 6 of these have been found in water and sediment in the Central Valley and Delta at toxic concentrations to aquatic organisms. Regional Board staff is presently developing a pyrethroid basin plan amendment for both water and sediment. Staff anticipates releasing the staff report for external review this summer and having a board workshop in the fall. Tentatively, the basin plan amendment will be brought to the board for adoption hearing in the summer of 2015. Again, we don't think we need any new resources to carry this out.
That's good. And as Ken mentioned earlier, when you say no resources, you mean
No new resources.
No additional resources, right.
But
Very good.
So I'll ask the question a different way. So to do the work that on this slide and on a couple others, a basin plan amendment is needed. But I think I just heard that to do the shift, we're going to pull it from the basin plan staff. Is that?
We have an allocation of PYs for basin planning.
And we can still, even though there's no resources required, even by pulling other resources away, we still think we can.
Well, we have like every other one of our programs, we have a backlog of work to do, and this is prioritizing that work within the staff we have. So something will not be done. We'll have to. We have a TMDL work plan. I'll let Ken speak, but we have a TMDL work plan. We may have to revise that work plan in order to accommodate this.
Well, and what I wanted to add is you are hearing a Delta presentation. There are other things going on in terms of studies and basin plan throughout the region. So we toyed when we're going through the rehearsals on this as to just how to present it. We could have started with a massive matrix, a wonderful spreadsheet to discuss of all the PYs doing all the things, but that really becomes overwhelming quickly trying to balance all that. That gets back into the whole portfolio management and everything. So what we're looking at is for the Delta, when we're talking about no new resources needed, is we're working on that now with staff. If these other things come in, that some of them like the Old and Middle River stuff, we're expecting the staff work on the Stockton DO ship channel to be winding down, and then probably we would be making that staff available to do Old and Middle River. Same type of people, same issues, and that's one reason we weren't starting it today or haven't been doing it earlier. So there's that sort of thing. There's the timing just in terms of long-range staff planning. There are some things that the fungicide studies, we hadn't been planning on doing that years ago because we didn't know it was an issue. The monitoring that's occurring out there has identified it as an issue. We don't know how big of a water quality problem it is till we study it, just like some of the other things with ammonia and delta smelt. The results could have been totally different. Ammonia could have had a huge impact on delta smelt, in which case our priorities will be changing and will be, so part of this is long-range planning and balancing of things. If there are things, we get feedback from the board members or the public that, this isn't really as big an issue, then we'll take that into account as we're balancing out things. But we are looking at one part of the staff pie and resources pie here.
So basically, this represents staff's sort of look at all these priorities and kind of where you think you want to go, and you're looking for sort of board conceptual approval with any specific comments, like some of us want to say, let's make sure we get the Mercury work done.
Right, and then we have to go back and see how to accomplish it, when it can be accomplished, and if it's not going to work, we're going to have to come back and tell you we can't do it unless we give up on these other things that are also important. So,
Well, I suspect that to some degree, when Chris says that we're going to may see a basin plan amendment in front of the board at a specific time, be it the fall of 2018 or whenever, that has already been coordinated with staff looking at your resources.
They'll develop a work plan.
Right,
And once we
right.
get approval on a direction, they'll
Right.
develop work plans on what it will take.
Yes, Carl, I'm basically the messenger here today. Obviously, I don't do all this work, so.
But you know what happens to messengers, don't you?
Yes, and I'm hoping to go home. However, the tasks and deliverables have sort of been worked out with the key seniors, and this is what they think can be accomplished, and this is also what we have sort of, in some instances, promised to you earlier on. So we don't think this is something impossible to do. And really, in part, it's a little bit like when you buy stock. They say the future's no indication of the past, but I started out telling you what we did on the 2008 work plan, and by and large, I think we have tried hard to do what we promised. And so I think we will try very hard again to meet these commitments, if you agree with them. Next, evaluate recycling and reuse of municipal wastewater. The Delta Stewardship Council recommended in their Delta Plan that the Central Valley Water Board should require entities that discharge municipal wastewater or urban runoff to Delta Waters to evaluate whether all or a portion of their discharge could be recycled. In 2009, the Central Valley Board passed a resolution requiring all discharges with MPDS permits to provide an evaluation of wastewater reclamation and land disposal. Board staff will require information every 5 years from all major wastewater treatment facilities in the Central Valley on the status of their recycling efforts, potential for additional recycling, and impediments to expanded recycling. These discharger reports will be posted annually on our website for public review. Again, we don't think we need additional funding to carry this out.
This is one item, and from what I'm hearing, some of the conversation taking place in the Capitol, and who knows how that plays out. But if some of it plays out, you may have some significant external requirements here. You're doing part of it already, but recycling is an issue that's being talked about a lot as we look at how do we better manage our water supplies. Of course, these kind of times bring that discussion around.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about the benefits of recycle and reuse of wastewater? I'm assuming that the wastewater in general, has more nutrients and things like that that we'd like to avoid getting into the delta?
Well, the first major beneficial reuse is that's water that won't have to be taken out of the estuary. So it's basically a new water source. And in a year like this, it's absolutely critical both for the estuary and that it provides new water and for some of the adjoining sort of watersheds, it could be a water source. For example, the Sacramento Regional Wastewater Treatment Facility, once they get that upgraded plant in place, that will be very high quality water.
Well, we heard yesterday how that some of that water may be moved to the consumers. And so we'll see where that goes. And it's, of course, in the Tulare Lake Basin, basically everything is recycled there. How it's recycled may be up to question, but being a closed basin, it stays in the basin.
Yeah, if I might, Dr. Longley, add a bit to this. The benefits of recycling vary greatly depending on where you are. Certainly, if you're taking a NPDES discharge and putting it onto land, whatever pollutants were associated with that discharge are now not going into the river. We now have to worry about the groundwater and nuisance issues, so it's not like a panacea. But a lot of water, say up in the Redding area for the wastewater treatment plants and agricultural runoff, it's not just all sewage treatment plants, that is water that is part of the water system downstream, and it can get used and used. So in some cases, if you, for crops, have very good water efficiency and have no runoff, you take your sewage treatment plant wastewater and use it on golf courses and things, replacing potable water, which is good. You may also dry up your streams. So there are pluses and minuses to recycling, and just blindly taking every drop of water and recycling it is not always the best solution, depending on which issue you're trying to solve. So
It gets back to the point we need good informed water management.
Next, adopt and implement a diuron basin plan amendment. Diuron is a pre-emergent herbicide used to control annual broadleaf and grassy weeds. It's one of the most common herbicides in the Central Valley, with both agricultural and non-agricultural uses. Most applications occur between November and February with the potential for off-site movement and storm runoff. 8 water bodies in the Central Valley and Delta are on the Clean Water Act 303D list right now because of diuron detections above toxic levels. Staff is developing a diuron basin plan amendment and anticipates having a draft staff report available for external review this summer, hold a board workshop in the winter, and maybe an adoption hearing in the summer of 2015. Again, we think we have the staff to carry this out. Toxicological assessment of current use fungicides and herbicides. This is the final project. And what we think we need is that the algal community in the Delta has changed over the last several decades, from diatoms to flagellates and blue-green dominated community. The old diatom community was indisputably more nutritious for primary consumers like zooplankton that feed on flagellates and blue-green algae. Of course, zooplankton are the primary food item for larval and baby fish. There's also been a decrease over time in the biomass of algae in the Delta, making it one of the least productive large estuaries in the world. This is a big deal. Changes in algal quality and quantity, or bottom-up effects, are one of the factors hypothesized to contribute to the decline in the endangered species. A recent review of several decades of pesticide monitoring in the Delta has demonstrated a shift in the type of pesticides being detected. The most common chemicals between 1990 and 2000 were organophosphate and carbamate insecticides. Now fungicides and herbicides are most commonly being detected. Of all aquatic organisms, algae are likely to be most sensitive to these chemicals. Little is known about their potential toxicity to algae and how their concentrations in water may contribute to shifts in the quantity and quality of available food. We believe a toxicological assessment is needed to determine the potential impact of these chemicals on native algae and whether they might contribute to these shifts in primary production in the estuary. Staff proposes this summer to form a technical advisory committee and a stakeholder advisory group to help develop an algal assessment study plan and later to evaluate study results. Funds would be solicited and studies conducted in 2015 and 16. In the spring of 2017, staff will prepare a white paper that summarizes all new information, including whether any of these chemicals can contribute to reductions in primary production. In the fall of 2017, staff will present the conclusions of the white paper to the board and request advice on how you want to proceed. We think that we need about a quarter of a person year between 2014 and 2017 to carry this out. Also, we're going to need an as of yet undetermined amount of contract money. So this slide summarizes the new resources required to carry out the 2014 Delta Strategic Plan. Overall, we estimate that we're going to need about 4 new PYs over the 5-year period, or about an additional person year per year. And as of yet, an undetermined amount of contract money. Again, I want to end by emphasizing that board staff cannot commit to carrying out any of this new work without additional funds. Okay, now I'd like to shift gears and talk for a moment.
Let's talk about additional funds. We had support shown to us earlier today by both the state and federal contractors, water agency, and then a speaker from Metropolitan Water District. Do you expect outside external funding to some degree from those folks, over and above what they're contributing now?
I am hoping that what will happen, what has happened in the past, is that we will develop good study plans and that they will be presented to the Delta Science Program, to the state and federal water contractors, to Southern California, and there will be a solicitation, and we will get some money from them. Now, obviously, it depends on developing robust study plans and showing sort of how all the pieces fit together, and that's obviously our job. But I'm hopeful that a large amount of the contract money can come from outside. Of course, help from state board would also be welcome.
Is anything that could contribute to this, and you may not be able to answer this, part of any of the bond funds, the bonding that has been proposed, the new bond?
I don't think any of the old bond measures could be used, but if there was a new bond measure, then many of these items have been proposed and by the Delta Stewardship Council and others, and so it would seem that they could be eligible for bond funding should such a bond measure pass.
That's very speculative.
Yes, sir.
Kind of like the stocks you talked about. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Now, I'd like to change gears and talk for a moment about the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, or BDCP. Last December, BDCP released their draft plan and associated environmental impact report for public comment. The plan's a comprehensive 50-year conservation plan for the Bay Delta estuary. It was designed to carry out the co-equal goals of the Delta Reform Act by providing a more reliable water supply while protecting, restoring, and enhancing the Delta ecosystem. The plan has been much discussed in the local newspapers, both positively and negatively. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan includes 22 conservation measures. Conservation Measure 1 evaluates various options for transporting Sacramento River water across the Delta. The preferred alternative is a dual conveyance system to take water from both the north and the south Delta. Taking water from the North Delta involves construction of two 40-foot diameter tunnels to transport Sacramento River water from about 10 miles south of Sacramento near Cortland down to the state and federal pumping facilities at Tracy. The plan also has 22 other conservation measures, including restoration of about 10,000 acres of seasonal wetlands that would be located on floodplains, and about 65,000 acres of subtidal and intertidal marsh. Other conservation measures include financial help with the operation and maintenance of the aeration device in the Stockton Ship Channel, implementing methylmercury controls on newly restored wetlands, and providing funding to support urban stormwater treatment measures to reduce discharge of contaminants into the delta. Now, staff provided comments on two earlier administrative drafts of BDCP, and we intend to send additional comments on this public draft. Well, I don't know everything we're going to say. There are two issues that we will definitely comment on. The first is permitting. Construction of the dual conveyance system and other conservation measures will require many water quality permits. Not all the information for developing the permits must be in the EIR, but we must be provided this information in a timely fashion to develop and issue the permits. So offline, the NPDS staff are beginning to talk with DWR about what's needed. Second, these projects will increase methylmercury in water and fish, and we believe that there's more that can be done to minimize this. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. Guidelines for the California Environmental Quality Act state that the EIRs are required to disclose all environmentally significant and unavoidable impacts that cannot be reduced to an insignificant level with mitigation. BDCP has identified at least two water quality impacts that fall in this category. These are increase in chloride, bromide, and electrical conductivity in the central and southern delta, and an increase in methylmercury in water and fish. Modeling for Conservation Measure 1, including the preferred alternative, shows an increase in chloride, bromide, and electrical conductivity in the area circled in red in the central and southern delta to your right. The increase in salt occurs for two reasons. First, the Sacramento River has lower salt content than does the San Joaquin, and this will result, first, Conservation Measure 1 is going to take more Sacramento and less San Joaquin River water. The Sacramento has lower salt content than does the San Joaquin, and this will result in better water quality being diverted to the surface areas south of the delta, but higher salt levels in the delta. Okay? Second, restoration of about 65,000 acres of tidal wetland is going to increase the size of the tidal prism, and this is going to result in more saltwater intrusion into the estuary. The location and timing and magnitude of the change in water quality cannot be precisely determined until the location of the restored wetlands are known. Nonetheless, BDC predicts substantially increased chloride concentrations in the delta, such that the frequency of exceeding the 150 milligram per liter objective would approximately double in the estuary. This would contribute to potentially significant impacts on municipal and industrial water supply beneficial uses in both the interior and western delta. Also, there would be an increase in the frequency with which the Bay Delta electrical conductivity objective would be exceeded in the Sacramento River at Edmonton and the San Joaquin River at San Andreas Landing and Prisoners Point. The increased frequency of exceedances at Edmonton and San Andreas Landing could potentially contribute to significant impacts on agriculture, while an increase in the frequency of exceedances at Prisoners Point is likely to cause aquatic life impacts. Now, BDCP has incorporated a number of environmental commitments and best management practices into the BDCP alternatives to avoid or minimize salt-related impacts. BDCP commits to partner with municipal and industrial agricultural users to develop methods for reducing the potential water quality impacts from operations of their diversion facilities. The commitments apply specifically to those water purveyors facing increased financial costs to treat and supply water at acceptable standards. The assistance could take the form of financial contributions or technical contributions or partnerships. It's a little unclear at this stage. The second impact is that BDC predicts an increase in methylmercury concentrations. Research in the Delta and elsewhere has documented that wetlands are very efficient producers of methylmercury. Restoration of 60 to 80,000 acres of wetlands is predicted to increase methylmercury concentrations in water and fish. The increase in fish tissue concentrations could pose a health risk to people and wildlife consuming them. BDCP has committed to mitigate methylmercury impacts by implementing Conservation Measure 12. Conservation Measure 12 is a methylmercury management plan that would require site-specific assessments of wetland areas before restoration begins, implementation of BMPs developed by the regional board in the Phase 1 Mercury Control Program, and monitoring and reporting. Although BDCP will implement Conservation Measure 12, they are uncertain whether it will be sufficient to reduce the projected increases in methylmercury that they're predicting.
Chris,
Yes, sir.
the BMPs that have been developed and other work that's gone on that I've read has showed that you can very significantly mitigate methylmercury production by basically controlling the redox potential at the water mud interface. Has there been any estimate of the amount of methylmercury formation that can be prevented by implementation of these BMPs?
I think that where we are now is the studies are indicating that there are some things that we can do to reduce methylmercury, such as controlling the amount of organic carbon that's available for methylating bacteria. And we could do this by more grazing on seasonal wetlands, by disking. There's probably some other things that can be done. What I think we need to be doing now is going away from the individual studies and sort of testing the BMPs on a larger scale. So at the moment they've been developed on like 1 acre plots, and we need to go to bigger areas across larger expanses of the Central Valley and test the BMPs. And I don't think we can answer your question, Dr. Longley, until we have done that. But I think there is promise. I don't know that we're going to completely be able to solve this problem, but I'm pretty sure that we can reduce methylmercury levels.
Well, there's a lot to learn. There's no doubt about that. Thank you.
Chris, are they looking at upstream, like remediation, whether with reservoirs or mines, to inhibit or reduce the influx of elemental mercury into the system?
No, sir. And that is clearly something else that could be put in our BDCP comment letter.
I think that's important, and I think replacing Victor is going to be important in that regard.
Thank you.
Well, we do have a, yeah, there is a TMDL being developed, am I correct, for upstream of the Delta?
It is slated to be developed, but what we are doing at the moment is concentrating on the statewide reservoir TMDL,
Okay.
TMDL, and as that one, it looks like we're getting ready to send that staff report out, and then I think Patrick Morris's section will begin to actually work on the upstream rivers. That's sort of the next thing in the queue.
Well, the dams are important.
They'll reinitiate the work. There was some work being done, and they were the same staff. They were diverted to work on the statewide reservoir team.
On the statewide reservoirs, and of course the reservoirs pose a real issue too. They become a storage point in the sediments for mercury.
It's still a dilemma for controlling it, but when that should be done soon, and
Right.
then they'll be diverted back.
We'll discuss that later when it comes up on the agenda.
So to finish this off, although BDCP will implement Conservation Measure 12, they're uncertain whether it will be sufficient to reduce their projected increases in methylmercury. And it's important to note that BDCP does not commit to funding the BMP studies that the regional board is undertaking or contribute to the mercury exposure reduction program to protect humans while the best management plans are being developed and implemented. So a second regional board comment on the public draft of the BDCP environmental document is likely to be that we think that BDCP can do more to mitigate the increase in methylmercury. They can help fund the phase 1 BMP development studies, and this will likely increase the chance of us developing viable alternatives. They can also fund the mercury exposure reduction program. And as Mr. Snyder says, they could help fund reduction of inorganic mercury, because we all know that more inorganic mercury in sediment begets more methylmercury. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
I think that's important that through the CEQA part of this process to ensure that these mitigation measures are enforceable. And if that requires funding, then they've got to figure out how to do that, I think, as they proceed, if they do.
We have a lot of issues in front of us, but this mercury issue is one that is probably one of the most intractable issues I've ever seen. And finding solutions such as Bob has suggested, and none of these solutions are going to be absolute. They're going to be partial solutions. But we need to attack it at every point we can. We've asked a lot of questions, made a lot of comments. Is there anything more to be said?
I just had a question. Conservation Measure 1 seemed to have some permitting implications, both for the actual development of that measure, but also for the wastewater facilities into the delta. I was just curious, how does that work as far as timing? I didn't think this agency had any approval position for that conservation measure, but I'm just trying to figure out, does the measure get approved and then the permitting is subsequent to that, or what's the timing on that?
I'll try to answer that. There's a number of different levels of approval. Certainly the biggest permit for the tunnels is going to be a water rights permit. It's a major change of diversion, issues of salinity standards in the delta, and that, while we are interested and may participate, on some technical studies on that, that's a state board permit. We will be involved in a whole lot of more construction-related issues, digging two 40-foot tunnels that are, 60 miles, I don't remember how long they are. You're moving a lot of material that has to go somewhere for reuse, reconstruction, landfilling, or something. There'll be dewatering of those tunnel areas. There will be construction of diversion works up near Sacramento that will require water quality certifications, all the normal stormwater construction permits. There's nothing that unusual about those types of construction projects, but there will be a lot of them. So we're working with the Department of Water Resources on what kinds of permits, when will they be needed? Should we write a general order to cover this whole thing or parts of it, or deal with individual orders? What kind of technical information do they need to be gathering to provide to us, so when we get an application, we can actually respond to it? So this is the same type of thing we do on, any huge project, whether it be public or private. This is just a very large one. And then when they get to the mitigations, like constructing wetlands, those are both sometimes construction stormwater permits. It can be water quality certifications, depends on the details. And a lot of that is very unclear when you get past the tunnels. The rest of it gets very unclear. So we're, again, working with DWR to try to minimize surprises that occur. This board is not an agency that will say yes or no to the tunnel project. I mean, it's just if they decide to do it, then we get involved in a lot of permits over really probably a couple decades.
Okay, thank you.
When we're writing, I assume this is Region 5's comments on the BDCP. It's important in this, it seems to also consider the state board as an audience, and with the interest in having them support our comments, of course.
Actually, on a lot of these types of things, we'll be providing comments. A lot of times we are coordinating those comments through the state board, so there is one water board comment from, in this case, probably the San Francisco Bay Regional Board, Central Valley Board, and the state board. And there'll also have to be the decision as to, so most likely it would not be an independent letter from us on these types of things.
I don't want to create timeline roadblocks or otherwise, but I don't know if in some form further board input or maybe a subcommittee to those comments might or might not be appropriate. I just throw it out there as an item of discussion. I don't have a clear opinion whatsoever. And then I had one other question, is that another player, and this is the Delta Protection Commission, and I don't know how that interfaces with BDCP and the Delta Stewardship Council. Or do they?
Maybe, Chris, I don't know where the Delta Protection Commission falls into the BDCP process. Can you?
I'm sorry, Dr. Snyder, I don't know either. They're a separate agency and probably will do their own comments.
Appreciate the elevation to doctor, but I did
Oh,
get
sorry.
a BS in geology.
I didn't catch that.
Makes me want to ask a question just to be called doctor, but I got nothing.
So, Dr. Longley, he suggested a subcommittee. Is there an interest in a subcommittee with the board on our comments?
Right. Bob, could you define again what you see that subcommittee, the responsibilities of that subcommittee?
And part of it is it helpful or not would be the first question. And I mean, Pamela, I don't know if you think that's a good idea or not either. I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to create an additional, leap or something.
No, I thought it was an excellent idea. I think this is, the Delta is one of our highest priority water bodies. That was through the last strategic planning effort we did, and I imagine this board still is of the same opinion. And this BDCP and the efforts that are ongoing is one of the most significant projects facing this state and our water board. So I would value the input of our board members on our comments. And I don't know the timing, so Chris will have to enlighten us on that.
Well, we owe comments to State Board, I think, mid-March. And so what we had sort of tentatively thought about a week before then, sending them up to upper management to review. So if we were to have a subcommittee, we probably would need to provide them even a little earlier.
Well, you would be engaging with a subcommittee much sooner. Right. So we have time. I guess I was wondering, mid-March we have time, but it is a significant document, so.
Right. I would presume that such a subcommittee might be more correctly labeled a Delta subcommittee. And as issues come along, such as mercury and so forth, it would address those also, rather than, because this is all intertwined.
Yeah, I'm interested in working on that.
I would be interested in a committee like that too. Is there interest from anybody else on the board?
Yeah.
Interest in having one or interest in being on it?
Being on it.
Actually, I'm very interested in being on it. I'm not sure exactly what I'd be signing up for, but sure. And a subcommittee can only have how many members?
2, that's
Two.
the issue.
Okay.
So this is not my area of expertise, nor am I that familiar with the region, so I would, admire whoever chooses to be on it, but it's not going to be me.
Yeah, I'm interested in having one. I'm happy to be on it, but I'm on quite a few subcommittees, so if there are other people who are interested, I would certainly be glad for them to be on it.
Okay, well, let's bring it back at another board meeting after we have time to kind of digest it.
We don't have time.
Yeah, that's right. We'll bring it back at a later board meeting, but.
We don't have time, Dr. Longley.
Oh, yeah, because our next board meeting is March. I thought you were telling me we don't have time to discuss it
No, we
today.
have, I would like you to discuss it now.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
be
Can't bring it
happy to do
back.
that, and, you know, if John wants to, I think that maybe that's a good idea.
Okay, John, you indicated interest?
And,
there we
and
go.
what I'm thinking, this is fairly limited at this, there may be an ongoing interest, but this is like a month and a half of when we will be engaged in this process.
Yeah, so if, from what I'm hearing is, a Delta subcommittee that would not end in a month and a half, but expect a month and a half worth of effort now and then have it continue as we move forward. If that's, seems to be the idea, then I'm sure I'm on.
Yes, but right now, we'll schedule at least a beginning briefing with you in a short order in the very near future, and Ken and Chris will work with you.
And be aware that one way or another, separate from this subcommittee, I will continue to be involved on Mercury. So that's up to the executive officer to wrestle with that one. But I will continue to be involved with
We will continue
Mercury.
to have individual briefings with you.
Individual briefings, and I'll be working with stakeholders.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
If we're done with the subcommittee discussion, I have some other questions.
Go ahead.
So there was mention that there is likely an increase in chloride, bromide, electrical conductivity in the delta for a couple reasons. And I'm wondering, and then there was also, one of them is what is that we'll be increasing or restoring some wetlands. And with an increase in salts in the delta and wetlands, is there a concern about selenium and selenium buildup in the delta as the water is, I guess, more stagnant in the delta with the water being detoured around?
That's actually a good question. Part of
I wouldn't
the
be so
worry-
surprised. I would expect a good question.
Part of the worry is that at the moment.
Closer to the mic, please.
Part of the worry at the moment is that most of the San Joaquin River is rediverted back down to the San Joaquin Basin, and now what's going to happen is we're going to have more San Joaquin River coming into the estuary. That coupled, as you said, with longer residence time may actually lead to selenium transformation to selenocysteine, selenomethionine, and then movement up the food chain. Probably at some, now, the BDCP has evaluated that and concluded that that's unlikely to occur, but frankly, I don't think we really have the scientific facts to know for sure one way or another. So at some stage, once this project is ongoing, then we're going to need to take another look at selenium tissue concentrations. And if that happens, then that old study we did in the 2004 Delta Strategic Plan could be very useful because it will have something to compare to.
So perhaps in our comments, we want to ask for some more testing or for some more studies to be done on selenium and the potential for selenium impact in the delta. I guess I'll pass that on to the subcommittee. And then another question I had, you mentioned that also because of the increase in salts in the delta, that there would be that would affect supplies for delta water users. And it's a little easier to work on curtailing or mitigating those that impact for urban users, for drinking water users, because there's one pipe going in. For agricultural users, that's really challenging because you've got a 40-acre field that you're diverting that water. Is it your impression that a significant study has been done to work on mitigating that impact for agricultural users? I know through our ILRP program, we're going to be looking at discharges from those water users, and I want to make sure that we're not, the water that they're getting is not going to be impossible for them to use based on their discharges.
I suspect that in the long run, some of the western Delta Islands will go out of agricultural production. That's my,
Which is
sort of-
why the Delta farmers are adamantly against the conveyance system. So it is, there are some of those that, in terms of the selenium, I couldn't answer, my microphone wouldn't turn on, but, and I apologize, but Joe just reminded me also, we also have the selenium TMDL and efforts on the Grasslands Bypass Project, which is further reducing selenium concentrations to the river. So there's many compounding issues going on with this study. We also have, which we'll be learning about, the climate change and the sea level rise and the influence of more of the flow, tidal influence of just the the salts causing that. I don't know if that's been considered in the BDCP as well, all the climate change and sea level rise.
yes, it has. That's actually been sort of evaluated as part of the long-term no change alternative.
The other thing, Chris, you didn't talk about, if I could just take a second, because I attended a different meeting and it was presented from a whole different perspective in terms of the way they project the drawdown of the reservoirs. In fact, I think Folsom and a few of the other reservoirs are projected to go after so many years down to dead load. So there will be no water resources available for fresh water refreshing from those reservoirs. Have we evaluated that in terms of impact on water quality as well?
What I focused, today I wanted to be very Delta-centric, and so the impacts that I talked to you about were what I thought were the most significant ones in the Delta. There are clearly impacts in the Central Valley. My executive officer pointed to one of them. Another impact that could be enormously beneficial is that if the export water has lower salt levels, then that is really going to improve water quality in the San Joaquin Basin. So this is just a really big project with a lot of moving parts to it, and I just focused in on the Delta today.
I understand, but if the Folsom Dam and if they're no longer have the water available to refresh the cold water for the salmon, will that impact that part of the Delta and downstream?
There is discussion in the AR document on what the drawdown in the fall would look like on upstream reservoirs, particularly for cold water storage for salmon. Obviously, that's a biological effect, and it would be felt in the Central Valley and in the Delta.
Chris, I wanted to thank you too for I think something that's not brought up very often, and you made it very clear, is not only is this a diversion of the water with the tunnels, but the switch of San Joaquin water to Sacramento water, I think, is not really very well understood. So we're decreasing quality in the Delta significantly while we improve the quality of the diversions. So I think that's a pretty important point, and I thank you for emphasizing that. And I think you did a great job. I appreciate it. And if I recall, I asked for the, so good idea, Bob.
Okay, great idea, Bob.
It's Dr. Bob.
Dr. Bob.
Dr. Longley?
Any further comments? Yes, Ken?
I just wanted to point out in the back right corner of the room, we have a number of staff. This is a large part of the planning TMDL staff, engineers and scientists who do the work we've been talking about and will be. I asked them to come in today if they had the time, both to hear this discussion because it affects how they'll be doing their work for a long time, as well as, frankly, we are often siloed. You're working on mercury, you're working on nutrients, and sometimes it's nice just to hear this bigger picture. Same issue for bringing items like this to the board.
Well, we appreciate their presence here. And
Could you all just raise your hand real quick, please? Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Very good. Any further comments? Chris, great job.
Thank you.
Dr. Foe, I should say. thank you for a great job, and obviously, we're going to be seeing this as a major part of the workload in the years to come. We're at a critical juncture right now.
Did we have any other interested parties?
Oh, any other interested parties? I'm sorry. I have no cards.
Okay.
I don't see any other. A lot of interested parties, but none to testify. The item, agenda item number 19 is a programmatic SEP overview, and it has been moved behind agenda item 20, which the reason for that being, of course, is that it should have been there in the first place. The SEP issues flow out of our enforcement report, and we thought that it would be better to give the enforcement report first. Chris Kerrigan is here from the State Board Enforcement Unit. It's 11:43, and it's a 75-minute presentation. We could launch into this for a few minutes and then go to lunch. What is your, how do you advise on this?
Well, Dr. Longley, I think we also, I think, have a few people here who are here just for the SEP program proposal. And as far as that goes, I think we have about a 10-minute presentation and then whatever discussion from the board. So that would potentially be a significantly shorter item, but we could do it either way.
To take the SEP now, and we'll reverse them then, back to where it was on the agenda. And we'll go next to agenda item 19. At this time, board staff will present a proposal to encourage use of supplemental environmental projects to aid disadvantaged communities within the region. This is an information item only and no action will be taken. Staff is seeking comments from board members on the proposal to guide continued development of the proposal. Following the presentation, interested parties will be allowed 3 minutes each to endorse the board, and we'll now begin with a staff presentation.
Hello, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name is Robert LaRue, and I'm a Senior Water Resource Control Engineer, and I'm the new Enforcement Coordinator for the Central Valley region. Today I'm here to talk to you about a proposal to encourage the use of supplemental environmental projects, or SEPs, to aid disadvantaged communities within the Central Valley region.
Robert, what office are you in?
This office.
Okay, great, thanks.
I have one question before you start. You said
Yes.
you're the new enforcement coordinator.
Correct.
Did we have one before? Or?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not a new position.
No, Dan Redalescu was my predecessor, and he left sometime last year, and I started here in August. So.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Before I begin, I just want to mention a couple of points that I want you to consider while I make my presentation. The first idea is that this proposal is being made in an effort to get more dischargers to agree to SEPs. The primary advantage of SEPs is that we can keep some of the money in our region and we have some influence on where it goes. The second consideration to think about is where can our money do the most good? Our recommendation is that we attempt to find and fund projects that benefit a wide spectrum of water quality initiatives while also benefiting disadvantaged communities. With those two ideas in mind, I'm asking you to tell me if you agree with this proposal, provide some feedback, and ask some questions of your own. A SEP is an environmentally beneficial project that dischargers are not otherwise obligated to perform, or one that would not be undertaken in the absence of an enforcement action. The State Water Board or regional water boards may allow a discharger to satisfy part of the monetary assessment imposed in an administrative civil liability, or ACL, by completing or funding one or more SEPs. SEPs, like compliance projects, are alternatives to simply paying the full amount of an ACL to the cleanup and abatement account. Enforcement staff pursue SEPs as part of negotiations on ACL complaints whenever possible. Currently, the amount of SEP money generated within the region is not correlative with the amount of ACL penalties levied against dischargers. The major concerns among dischargers are those of risk, time, and money. The SEP policy states, if the SEP is not fully implemented in accordance with the terms of the order, the Water Board is entitled to recover the full amount of the suspended penalty, less any amount that has been permanently suspended or excused based on timely and successful completion of any interim milestone. In essence, it is the discharger's responsibility to ensure that the SEP meets its intended completion milestones. During settlement negotiations, dischargers are often open to the idea of a SEP, but are then unwilling to take on the potential liability of paying the entire amount of the SEP if the project never comes to fruition. Staff have been working to find some alternatives to improve our SEP program. The best alternative that we arrived at was what is already being implemented in the Central Coast region, Region 3, and the Lahontan region, Region 6. In essence, those regions have developed relationships with third-party groups that have SEP projects identified by their respective boards as being important to their regions. The Central Coast region is working with the Central Coast Ambient Monitoring Program, or CCAMP, and the Low Impact Development Initiative, or LIDI. The Lahontan region is developing a similar SEP program with the Truckee River Watershed Council and the Inyo Mono Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. These projects have been vetted and pre-approved by their respective boards. They are well-established projects that provide dischargers and staff with a greater degree of confidence, and all parties believe that the money will be well used. We wanted to pursue a similar program for SEPs in our region, but with a focus on something that we believe to be important to our board, and that is supporting disadvantaged communities. Staff met and spoke with representatives from disadvantaged community groups and discussed ways that our region could assist them with this program. The Community Water Center brought the Rose Foundation to us, and we evaluated their proposal with respect to the SEP policy and our criteria. The Rose Foundation put together a proposal similar to those in Regions 3 and 6, but with several different types of projects with unique benefits to water quality, but also with an added focus of benefiting disadvantaged communities. The Rose Foundation for Communities and the Environment is a grant-making public charity based in Oakland with extensive experience in managing Clean Water Act SEP funds and supporting community-based environmental projects in the Central Valley and throughout California. The Rose Foundation's proposal includes provisions for development, providing guidance documents for how the program will be administered, and a project list including budgets, timelines, and milestones. Administration, written contracts with specified deliverables and accountability and nexus provisions in compliance with our SEP criteria. Development of reporting criteria and intervals, and strict accounting stipulations, including being subject to their annual audit. For the Rose Foundation's proposal, eligible project types include but are not limited to water quality monitoring programs, well rehabilitation and replacement, watershed assessment programs, wetland, water body, or riparian habitat conservation or protection programs, pollution prevention projects, and public awareness projects. We believe that these project types encompass enough variety to benefit water quality in many areas. Additionally, their proposal also states that grant decisions will be based on the benefits to disadvantaged communities, the degree of community support, and the degree of community involvement. Of course, this does not mean that all SEP funds must go to the Rose Foundation. We are open to any and all proposals for SEPs or an approach similar to this one from another group working to protect water quality. Ultimately, it is up to the dischargers to choose whether they want to enter into a SEP agreement and which projects to fund. However, staff are recommending pursuing the Rose Foundation's proposal due to their excellent track record and having over 20 years of experience in providing grants to community-based organizations and environmental justice programs. Their experience and success allow minimal oversight by staff and that other SEPs may not provide. If the board is interested in moving forward with this proposal, staff will present a resolution at the March board meeting. This concludes my presentation. This concludes my presentation. At this time, I'm happy to address any questions that you may have. Additionally, Tim Little from the Rose Foundation is here to elaborate on his organization, and Chris Kerrigan and Patrick Palupa have agreed to answer any or address any legal questions you may have. Thank you.
So if this board is, as I understand it, if this board has interest, then this issue will come back at the March meeting?
That is
And
correct.
specifically with, among other things, with the draft, I presume at this point it's a draft resolution that's been provided to us. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Questions? Yes, Carmen?
Not necessarily a question, but I can tell you that I feel very enthusiastically happy about this. I think that this is I just sort of perked right up when I was hearing about this and kind of imagining the possibilities. So I certainly, based on what I've heard, am hopeful that the board could support something like this. And as an attorney, I'm not normally sort of this trusting, but given that we've got other attorneys here to sort of catch the pitfalls, I like this.
You've spoken enough.
That's right.
I don't think that, but the attorneys here. Go ahead, John.
So the question, a couple of questions. One is, does this, would this be sort of a good seal stamp of approval from the board to the Rose Foundation? Or is there, maybe that's a legal question, are we promoting or recommending? How does that work?
Yeah, I think here's how it will work in practice, and I think this might answer your question. What's going to happen is the Rose Foundation, essentially what we're doing here is trying to capitalize on the Rose Foundation's institutional capabilities to provide oversight and get this money to communities that really need it, get the SEPs to communities that need it. To facilitate that, the Rose Foundation will come up annually with an assortment of projects that they plan on funding if SEP funds are directed to them over the course of the next year, or just a menu that could be chosen by a discharger who wants to fund those. And in the context of settling an ACL complaint, usually there's hurdles in place for a discharger. They don't have the contacts within those communities. They don't have the oversight capabilities. So they would instead just cut a check to the Rose Foundation, who would provide that oversight, get that money to the places where it needs to go. And every year, the Rose Foundation would submit a report to the board and say, here's what we funded over the course of the past year. And when that report was submitted, the discharger's obligation would be done, so they wouldn't have that kind of ongoing potential liability hanging over those heads. And we think that's an efficient way of addressing some of the inefficiencies in the SEP program that we have right now.
And a question that I would have as a lead up to that is, what sort of administrative overhead, if any, does the Rose Foundation have?
It's very low, and actually I was just sending emails back and forth to Chris even earlier this morning regarding how we would cover that. Generally speaking, the SEP policy, which I think dates back to 2009-ish, and was adopted by the state board, requires dischargers to fund oversight costs, and they're not generally considered part of the SEP itself. Now, that usually presents an additional cost to somebody who wants to fund a SEP. I think there's ways in which we can have the money that goes to the Rose Foundation can be considered part of the SEP, and the Rose Foundation would take a percentage to cover their oversight costs. Now, that I think Tim would be able to respond to what those percentages are. They're very low in terms of what we've looked at, and they are scaled to the size of the projects that they oversee.
And those percentages are also included in a supplemental item in your agenda packets as well. The Rose Foundation's proposal should be in front of you as well.
So to follow up on this concept, if I'm a discharger and the first question, if I go into a SEP versus a penalty, is it a lower number?
No, it's pretty much the same. The motivation for funding a SEP really is, let's keep the money in our community. We know we had some violations. We want to settle our liability, and we'll keep the money here. We'll keep a portion of the money here. So generally, it's less than 50% of the overall costs, unless something extraordinary happens, and we really want to fund more than that. And I think that the the impetus behind this particular proposal is to make it so that it's equal to what the settlement would be otherwise, not more than what the settlement would be otherwise.
And even though I'm asking questions, I'm not opposed to SEPs or this idea. I'm just trying to figure out how it works. So if I'm a discharger and I enter into this, my liability ends when the Rose Foundation's annual report says that the project was completed. So we can only do less than an annual or a length of time the project has to.
We've been discussing these issues for a while, so that's exactly the same type of questions that we've been having. I think there are different ways to conceptualize this. We can certainly talk about it more when the actual proposal comes in front of you. But the initial thought was that even if the project isn't completed, it would be when the year that they submit their payment to the Rose Foundation. The Rose Foundation takes some time, allocates those funds. They may not be fully expended, the projects may not be fully completed, but it's just the next year. The next cycle would be forgiving their liability. And that kind of splits the difference between where it is in a lot of the Federal Clean Water Act litigation cases that the Rose Foundation has a track record doing, and for those cases, the discharger's liability is completely resolved as soon as they cut the check. Our policies put a little bit more on us to follow up. Most times it's when we get a full completion report from the discharger, so we're kind of splitting the difference. Because the Rose Foundation does have some institutional capability to say, to enter into contracts with the folks that they have these projects. If the project doesn't get done, they can ask for their money back. And so we think that serves as a safeguard to allow us to split the difference, to say just the next year, by the next report, show how the Rose Foundation is proposing to allocate the funds, and that's good enough.
And would the Rose Foundation have any liability? Are they taking on any risk?
They're not taking on any risk. Okay. I mean, ultimately, if the discharger doesn't cut the check, then that's the discharger's liability, of course. If the Rose Foundation reports that there's been some difficulties in dealing with the discharger, then it comes back in front of us. But essentially, this does represent a great deal of trust that we're putting in the Rose Foundation, a trust with some legal safeguards, of course. But we're relying on the Rose Foundation to bring these projects home.
And I guess my last question is, if there's a little trust but verify aspect to this, are we proposing an initial time frame? Is this a pilot program, or are we gonna have to get reapproved by the board in a few years? I think I'd be in favor of something like that.
Well, what we're doing, what the proposal is that they come up with a new list of projects every year. The executive officer certainly could be authorized to approve that list of projects or pull the plug on the whole thing if it's just not going in the right direction. And certainly we could bring this, in her discretion, we could bring this matter back in front of the board every year, just years where this project's been successful. It could be in the EO report. There's a bunch of different ways of doing that. But I think the bottom line is we're building in the capability to pull the plug if it's not working.
And I'd be comfortable if it's in the EO report. Mr. Tim Little is here.
I want to say something real quick first. And what are you, Jennifer or Jenny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question, but maybe it's not related.
Well,
to
I'd like to
exactly
ask Mr. Little to speak and address, and maybe that will begin to provide some answers, but I'm not closing off questions. It's
I understand. I just wanted to provide some leading
Yes, sir.
information. I mean, basically, I do want to say that I think, in my experience with the Rose Foundation, this is a very good selection of a third party to administer this type of program, and I appreciate staff for identifying that. The other thing is that I hope you guys will address is can there be like a series of sort of strategic projects that are just ongoing, and then you can fit funding in to any particular project at any particular time. And the third question I'm going to have that you might address is, who decides on these projects? And I assume that this is the Rose Foundation in consultation with the environmental justice community. And, maybe we get to look at them, but I don't think we even need to have a final approval on what those projects are necessarily.
Yeah, I'll comment real quick on that. I think ultimately, because they are funded through our ACL actions, we do have to have some say in what projects get approved and what projects don't get approved. That's why the list is in front of you. I think that the resolution provides a little bit of guidance in terms of what that means. One of the decisions that you'll have to make, and we welcome your thoughts now. One of the decisions that you'll have to make is we're limiting this to disadvantaged communities. That's a fairly nebulous term, but there certainly are SEPs that were proposed to the Rose Foundation that didn't really deal with disadvantaged communities. We suggested, look, this project really is just to fund disadvantaged communities. We want the focus to be there. Certainly a whole nother proposal of this type could be enacted for, say, conservation groups, could be for any type of organization that wants to set up that has the capacity to set up the oversight of a project list like this. We could set something up like that. So there's that component. We also want to include a component where we're not necessarily funding something where the board has considered a policy position and funding something adverse to that. I think that would be a fairly high bar. We welcome a lot of contentious discussion, but I think something where the board has made a policy decision on something, we wouldn't want to be funding something that's adverse to that.
Certainly.
So this actually
just a
ties
second.
right into the question I was going to be asking, which
Excuse me, Sandra's been wanting to talk.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sandra.
I don't know how to start this out, but I guess I want to give a testimony on the disadvantaged communities coming from there. Rose Foundation has been active in Alpa since 2005. Without that foundation, it wouldn't have succeeded in the course of the water, in the arsenic in the water, and many other things. I don't know if I can say that, what should I say, how they run their business, but I know that several disadvantaged communities have benefited from the Rose Foundation, our community being one that was very necessary and is still on the water issues and safety, health, and water. So that's what I have to say on that part. I know that they work really with disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Jenny?
Okay, I'm going to backtrack a little bit because what Patrick was talking about was exactly my question that I had initially. I see that there was a deadline already for grant proposals that they were specifically going to ask a select group of recipients. It appears to me that I think there could be a lot of potential recipients that would be pretty turned off and feel like they were excluded from this process. And what are the ramifications for that?
Number of different things going on. I think first of all that we are intending to broadcast this list and the resolution out to the broad public and inviting some comments on that. So if somebody thinks that they have a project that was excluded from that list, bring it to the board and that'll be your decision to make. And I think that's an ongoing commitment. Year after year, either the executive officer or the board will take a look at the list of projects, and if one has been excluded, we'll bring that. That's something that can be put back in by the board. That's a proposal that's very flexible. Most of this falls within our broad enforcement discretion, so we're not exactly hemmed in by anything particular in terms of what the project list is. This is fairly free-flowing. Sounds like Pamela.
I think Pamela would like to speak.
I'm sorry, but we have a process in place already for pre-approval of SEP projects. And on our website, when Dan Radulescu was here, we have a list of pre-approved projects by the board that a discharger can go to. So for individuals who may have a project that aren't disadvantaged communities, they certainly can provide a project to the board. The board will review it, post it, and approve it, so it's ready and there for it. This is unique in that we're looking to serve the disadvantaged communities. This is an opportunity for a discharger to select a pre-approved project that serves them and then pay a check to the Rose Foundation, and they don't need to worry about going out and finding a disadvantaged community or working with them or seeing that the project's through. That's what the Rose Foundation provides, that discharger. But certainly any project that someone wants to propose and it meets the criteria, this board would seriously consider it.
I think the appeal of having the Rose Foundation is that it makes it that much easier to do a SEP project. And, you know, there are a lot of smaller groups that are doing conservation work that aren't working with disadvantaged communities that don't have the capacity to develop a program and have it, you know, exactly, the funds exactly tie in with what a potential SEP project could be. Is there the potential ever for the Rose Foundation or a similar foundation? But since we're partnering, it looks like there's a potential for partnering with the Rose Foundation. Is there a potential for the Rose Foundation to open that up or have a separate stream for non-disadvantaged communities as well?
Certainly, I understand they can. I was intrigued by the Region 6 with the Integrated Regional Water Management, which would also open up a potential for that. So there are other groups if they come
Right.
to us. It's just that we were focused simply on the disadvantaged communities with this effort.
Well, Mr. Little is sitting here representing the Rose Foundation. You've heard all of these questions and
I
these
wanna
comments
speak
and
for
these
him, Dr.
concerns.
Longley.
Let me, it's your turn to answer, please.
There we go. Both lights on. Thank you, Dr. Longley, members of the board. I very much appreciate your consideration of this, and it's truly an honor to be here and have this proposal under consideration. A couple words of background in response to the question. We've been working we started our SEP program about 17, 18 years ago, and we've handled approximately 300 settlements. The vast majority have been federal Clean Water Act cases under the supervision of the United States Justice Department, and we've handled SEPs from the Los Angeles area through Seattle, up and down the West Coast. Those have not been limited to disadvantaged communities. And we have a large water quality fund, which is funded by SEPs, and we do have the capacity to broaden beyond disadvantaged communities. We very much, in launching into this program, very much responded to the request to develop something for disadvantaged communities. And we very much envision, if your board decides to go forward with this, an open enrollment, open application process with a very broad outreach, so that it's very inclusionary to communities. We didn't think that it was wise to do that in developing this pilot list, because it's still somewhat speculative if it'll go forward at all. We contacted through our records and with some help from environmental justice organizations in the Valley, contacted approximately 35 organizations and invited them to submit proposals. Approximately 18 or 19 did. We winnowed that down to a preliminary list, which I think may be in front of you, and I believe there may still be, that's still preliminary, and I don't think that that's our final list to propose. As has been brought up, there are a couple of conservation-oriented projects on there, but they may not meet the disadvantaged community criteria.
I'm sorry, Tim. I'm sorry, but the project list hasn't yet been
hasn't
provided
yet
to the
been.
board members.
Okay,
but
so that's-
I could do so immediately after.
Okay, but so that's in process. We're prepared. It's in the final stages. We're prepared to put that forward for your March meeting.
Thank you. And I just want to make clear that I absolutely agree with staff's plan to work with disadvantaged communities first. I think that's a very important step. So I do not disagree with that decision at all. I actually commend it, and I'm really grateful for that. I just want to make sure that legally we're not getting ourselves into some hot water by being selective at all. But I'm glad that we are working with disadvantaged communities first. So thank you for that.
Yeah, Carl, can I ask one more question?
Go ahead.
And I'm not sure who to ask this to, but do we have and this goes to Bob's point, that if we had sort of a longer term project that lots of little SEPs could get thrown into that, and so I guess it's just more of a comment than a question. I was going to ask sort of what the average SEP looked like, but if no one's been doing them, maybe that we don't have good averages. But the benefit of something like this is that, you know, people might be willing to cut a, you know, 4-digit check, you know, $1,000 or whatever, and we could build up the SEP funds rather than have to take on that risk. So
I can respond to that as well. In our initial outreach, we've developed projects that range from a few $1,000s for river cleanup to complicated multi-year, 3-year plans dealing with mercury issues, among other things, and also pharmaceutical take-back. And in many cases, proposals are scalable. In terms of the longer term proposals, one of the things that we'll be doing when we report back to this board is giving you an update on the status of projects. And I'm envisioning we would come back and we saw these are grants, projects that have been launched recently. Here's a report on things that we've supported last year. These are completed. These are 50% completed. Those types of milestones, because our administration over the projects extends until they are fully and completely completed. And we have we require pretty detailed work plans and those types of things enforceable by grant contract.
Just one last thing is that I think the updates are important. I think that, the board, and when I say board, I certainly mean staff, take a lot of heat for these, for enforcement and money and things like that. And then we also sort of take heat for maybe not doing enough or moving fast enough with disadvantaged communities. So by having, if we move forward with this proposal, having updates maybe more than maybe just in the executive officer's report, maybe an informational item on a yearly basis, I think would go a long ways in us being able to be knowledgeable and being able to respond to maybe some of the concerns or issues that come up. So yeah, I'm less giddy now, but I'm still like it.
At this point, and I'm not cutting off the discussion, but we do have a couple of interested parties that maybe can add to and give you a chance to ask some additional questions.
Sure.
So go ahead with those. We have Omar Carrillo, Policy Analysis with the Community Water Center. And then I have a card for Greg Bates, the Executive Director of the American Basin Council of Water of Western States, I guess is what that is. Go ahead, Omar.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate staff's work on this. We definitely feel that this is the right approach more immediately. The issues that we, Community Water Center, so actually Community Water Center, Policy Analyst, and as previously stated, there's just so much need with small communities. You have communities that are being impacted, the water's being impacted. They might be primarily immigrant. Some folks might be undocumented. They're in the middle of a field. There's all this that has to go into actually figuring out what's impacting their water. We get calls all the time from, and we work with communities. The issues go down to the minute, like very small, 20, 30, 40 community members, residences, to, the larger scale contamination that a lot of us hear about. And I think that, but one thing that's critical is that the issue still takes a lot of work to address, even at the smallest level. And so the reason, we've followed the SET program a little bit, and to the extent that there is an ability to focus in on disadvantaged communities and provide that resource and really get down to addressing the issues and starting to kind of take folks off the list. I think that is the correct approach. And we definitely feel that, the Rose Foundation, with the amount of work that they've done across the board with the environment, so not just with environmental justice communities, speaks for itself. And so it's an ability to kind of build up from that, right? And so to the extent that this is the appropriate approach, we very much appreciate staff's work in this, and also for your consideration moving forward in March. So thank you very much. And if there's any questions for me, I'm just here just to support.
Any questions, sir? Mr. Carrillo?
I don't know if I can ask this, but did you apply for any funding? And if so, can you give us an example of a type of project that you would have or did not apply for?
I'm fairly certain we did. I'm fairly certain we did. I'll be quite honest. I didn't submit the application myself, but
maybe just ideas of projects you would envision being funded.
Sure. You have. I actually gave one to begin with, and those are real examples. So you have you have communities who are off. You can consider them to be, in some people's eyes, off the grid. They can be in the middle of an agricultural field or next to an industrial complex, and ultimately it could be a project that there could be. It could be the way to address that would be a project that ultimately we start kind of addressing those issues and working more collaboratively instead of, because a lot of times if a person's been identified, a lot of times, our approach is like, hey, you're responsible. You need to help these communities out. So, I can get, there's examples of small communities that their water is impacted, or there's other environmental issues that are impacting them, and that we worked with that it really could create more of a collaborative relationship possibly. Obviously they're getting fined, so it's not very collaborative, but at the end of the day, it's in the way of really focusing in, because the way I understand the SET program to work now is that you're paying in and it's being distributed throughout, right? It's paid into a pot and it's being distributed statewide. So, it could be a way to kind of focus in more on specific projects and focus on small disadvantaged communities.
I would add that we were hoping that you'd give the thumbs up today to go forward and bring this at March, and waiting for that thumbs up. We will send you the draft list right away, and hopefully restore some of Carmen's giddiness, because there are a lot of cool proposals on there. I think it'll give you a really good flavor of the type of proposals that the Rose Foundation oversees.
John?
So, first of all, you'd mentioned earlier that you think it's a low percentage overhead, and I just found it in here, and it's 10% under 500,000. I know when state agencies are given overhead out of a fee authority, it's more on the range of 5%, and I think most of the SEPs will probably be in the under $500,000 range. So I don't need an answer. I don't need Tim to sort of comment. I just want to make sure we've thought about it, the appropriateness of it, and the scale, and if there's a whole bunch of them in 1 year, is there a cap? Those kind of questions. I know this is their proposal, but I just want staff to look at it before.
And just for context, if the university does it, federal money, it's on the order of 50%. If we're state money, we're around 25%. Occasionally, we can get it down to 15%. I think the overhead looks very good to me as one board member.
Yeah, it's low compared to the numbers that we're used to working with.
Generally speaking, with nonprofits, you're looking at up to 15% for overhead and 10% for development work, so which is...
If I could offer just one data point. Because all of the federal clean water SEPs have to be reviewed by the U.S. Justice Department, they've told us that they will routinely accept any overhead up to 15%. 10% is our cap on smaller ones, and then, as you've noted, it is scalable because we do get economies of scale with bigger projects.
I do appreciate all that additional insight. Obviously, NGO work is not my bailiwick, but something to compare to, and I just want to make sure staff had thought about it, and I appreciate that.
We have one other card, Greg Bates.
Well, he's coming up. Also, the NGOs have to have insurance and other overhead that the state
Our rule of thumb generally is under 15, in terms of what we see too. Particularly when you're getting into disadvantaged communities, it's really tough for that money to penetrate, and so 10% to us seemed very reasonable.
Hello, I'm Greg Bates from the American Basin Council of Watersheds, which is a collaborative stakeholder group in the West Placer, North Sacramento area, the area between the Bear River and the American River. All those little foothill streams in there like Dry Creek and Auburn Ravine, in the Roseville, Lincoln area, Sac County area. Do you have the letter that in front of you?
It was just handed out.
So I'm going to not have to follow that so closely since you have that information. I think our groups, our collaborative is a lot of local agencies and other organizations that work on watershed conservation. We're very interested in salmon and steelhead that are in our Central Valley creeks. We try to coordinate the activities of all of these agencies that a lot of times don't talk to each other, and put out a lot of information. We have worked very closely with the Central Valley Regional Board for quite some time, and we work closely with the permittees on the other end. So we try to facilitate the process of watershed conservation between agencies and the regulated community. We have had interaction with the SEP program for a number of years. The organization has been around since 1996, and so this program that we're looking at now has been developed since then, I believe. Early on, it was pretty nebulous, and then this program came along, and it's been, as has been noted several times, it's pretty difficult to get a project through this program, and we have a lot of projects within our region that could benefit from these funds, and we've tried to get them several times, and it hasn't been successful. I think there's two things that are indisputable here, and one of them is that the Rose Foundation is absolutely a quality organization that is very good at doing this sort of thing. No one could say otherwise. And the other is that it's a wonderful opportunity for disadvantaged communities who have great need. Those things are indisputable. Our concern is that these funds belong in the community where the violation occurred, and that's really pretty much our main point to make here today. So I think that it would be good if we could find a way to make the SEP work better for people in the local communities. One suggestion we have for that is that we could work more with integrated resource water management plans that are mandated by DWR, and always have a big long list of projects that could be implemented. And I've had contact with Robert, and I'll continue to talk with him and see if we can't coordinate better with him.
Well, I appreciate this, your comments, and I think that Jenny touched on this earlier in some of her questions, at least the response to it, in the fact that the Rose Foundation has the ability to work on a large number of different types of projects and has a history of doing this. Any further questions or
So
comments?
Dr. Longley, if I could
Yes.
point out, we do have this list of pre-approved projects, and most of them are from watershed restoration type projects, a good number of them. And so those are always available, and anyone can submit projects for the board to review, public notice, and then put on this list. So it's available. We've also been, over the last few years, pursuing the environmental justice in disadvantaged communities and have been unsuccessful in getting a list of projects, where the Rose Foundation will provide us that resource, is they have the community relationships. Because what I found with the disadvantaged communities is they don't particularly like to talk to the state. They like the local people and people who know them and that they trust. And so I'm hoping through this effort we will be able to get a very good list of projects that could be advantageous to the disadvantaged communities. And we've had a couple of very successful projects that they've benefited from in recent activities, but we had to do a lot of the legwork to find those projects. So this may help us. In the meantime, the watershed groups have never been shy about giving us projects to propose. It's just some of them are pretty pricey, and there's that risk that the project won't be completed, and then the discharger is at risk of having to pay the balance of their penalty.
I understand. Do we have a consensus on the board? Do you want this back on the March agenda with a resolution?
We could do that, but I'd rather, like Patrick suggested, give a thumbs up to start proceeding on this.
Well, that's basically what I would expect as part of that.
Yep, I have the resolution 99% drafted. We've got the list. It would hit the streets if not, if not Monday, then very early next week.
So
And
you want us to agree to the resolution today?
just tell us to put it on the calendar, and what I'm hearing is you'll have a resolution in front of you in March that'll more specifically delineate all the responsibilities of the entities. Probably some feedback from OE. I think we're pretty close to getting their blessing on that one. I
And
see some thumbs up. I'll take that as a blessing. We may have something a little more formal for you in March so that we'd be able to approve this project, get it up and running, and get that list together for
And you have my
2014.
thumbs up. I presume everybody else.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would say that putting it into the process machine, getting it back before us is the right way to go. Yeah.
Sandra? You have your finger on the.
Now's the time.
Okay, I am part of a committee for Better Alpine in Alpine, that gets the Rose Foundation grant. They didn't this year, but they're gonna apply for it. Do I recuse myself?
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll take a look at that. It may be that you'd recuse yourself from the
voting,
list.
yeah.
But in terms of the resolution is neutral, so you could still give the thumbs up to the overall concept. If the Committee for Better Outpaw had a individual proposal on that list, we could recuse you
Yeah,
either
they
for
didn't
the.
receive anything, but they're gonna apply maybe the next round in September, October. Probably I'll be out of the thing here anyway, so, okay.
We'll make sure you're taken care of either way.
Thank you.
Bob?
I was gonna say, that sounds like bad news. There's also, I wanted to just address a little bit of the American Basin Council's comments, and, I mean, this is, the SEPS funds are like 50% of what, a fine might be, or not to exceed, and the other part goes into the cleanup abatement fund, and that often goes to a lot of important habitat watershed restoration projects also. So this is a pilot project. It's a portion of the money that goes to that, and there's a number of different projects in a number of different regions, I suspect, in the state to address, the nexus issue of something. And also, I work with Integrated Regional Water Management Plan on the west side, and there are other pots of money. There's specific pots of money and some of the old water bond stuff that comes to those areas also. And one of the issues here that the Rose Foundation is really addressing that hasn't been stated that's very important is there's a capacity issue for these local groups to even be able to put together proposals that they need. And I think one of the things that the Rose Foundation is good is helping to build that capacity and helping people get their applications in, and then helping to ensure that the work gets done. And that's something we can't come close to doing. It's a special need in disadvantaged communities, and I think this program's incredibly valuable in that also.
I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly why we're doing this here. I would add, for what it's worth to the conservancy groups out there, like Pamela mentioned, we do have a SEP list that we maintain, our own menu of SEP options. A lot of that is watershed restoration, and I would say that perhaps one of the reasons why it's not fully utilized or utilized that much is I think one of the cheapest projects there is $75,000. It goes up to projects 2.1 million and more. It might be worthwhile, and we can work with Robert to get some on there that may be a little bit more bite-sized, because we do a lot of enforcement actions, but there are only a few of them that are up in that. You double whatever the price is, so you're talking about enforcement actions of $150,000 or more. There's not a whole lot of those to choose from. For the 2.1 million, you're talking about a 4.1 million ACO. We don't do a lot of those, so it might be worthwhile to reach out to the watershed groups and see if we can get some more on our menu, or on our internal menu, that are a little bit more bite-sized.
Is there any more discussion? Then we will expect this back on the March agenda, And you've gotten a thumbs up from this board. Anybody object to? It's a thumbs up. And we'll proceed with it. Thank you. We'll be back in, let's see, can we do luncheon? Do we have anything to discuss off of our, we have nothing to discuss.
No closed session.
No closed session. We'll be back at 1:15.